They said she was a traitor. They said she conspired against the crown she wore beside him for 10 years. They said Queen Seraphina Vale deserved to burn. And when they stripped the gold from her throat and threw her into the mud outside the Capitol gates, not a single voice rose in her defense. Not even his, especially not his. Because the man she called king, the man she bled for on 100 battlefields, had already chosen his mistress over his queen. And tonight, you're going to watch her crawl out of that mud and become something they'll regret creating. Stay until the end. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. Because this story doesn't forgive, and neither will she. The first crack appeared on a Thursday. Seraphina didn't notice it then. She was too busy approving grain shipments to the eastern provinces, too focused on preventing another famine like the one that had killed 3,000 people 2 winters ago. Her hands moved across parchment and wax seals while servants filtered in and out of her study, their footsteps soft against marble floors that had been polished to a mirror shine. Evelyn Marrow entered carrying a tray of tea. Nothing unusual about that. Evelyn had served the queen for 7 years. 7 years of brushing Seraphina's hair before state dinners. 7 years of lacing up ceremonial gowns and whispering encouragement before treaty negotiations. 7 years of standing so close that Seraphina had stopped seeing her as a servant and started seeing her as something closer to a sister. The tea smelled like bergamot and honey. Seraphina took a sip without looking up from the grain manifest. The liquid burned pleasant and warm down her throat. What she didn't see was the way Evelyn's fingers trembled as she set down the tray. What she didn't notice was how her most trusted attendant wouldn't meet her eyes. What she completely missed was the fresh bruise on Evelyn's collarbone, barely visible above the neckline of her dress, shaped exactly like a man's mouth. The same shape Lucien's mouth made when he was being rough. But Seraphina was busy saving provinces from starvation, so she missed it entirely. King Lucien Arden came to bed late that night. He always came to bed late these days. Royal duties, he said. The northern border needed attention. The trade delegations required personal oversight. Seraphina believed him because she'd spent a decade learning to believe him, learning to swallow her doubts like bitter medicine and trust that the man who'd crowned her in front of 10,000 witnesses still remembered his vows. She was already under the silk sheets when he entered their chambers, his boots heavy against the floor. He smelled like wine and something else, something floral and unfamiliar. Seraphina's nose wrinkled, but she said nothing. She'd learned years ago that queens who asked too many questions were called hysterical. Queens who demanded accountability were labeled difficult. So she stayed quiet and let him undress in the darkness, let him slip into bed beside her with all the warmth of a stranger sharing a coach on a long journey. His back faced her. It always faced her now. "Tell me about the northern negotiations," she said softly. "They're handled, just like that. 2 words. No details, no discussion, nothing that acknowledged she'd spent 3 years establishing the very trade routes he was now supposedly protecting. "Lucien," she tried again. "I heard from Minister Grayson that—" "I don't want to talk about Grayson." His voice carried an edge she didn't recognize, sharp and defensive and wrong. "Did something happen?" she asked. "Nothing happened. Go to sleep, Seraphina." He'd never used that tone with her before, dismissive and cold, like she was a child bothering him with questions about where babies came from. The words sat between them in the darkness, and for the first time in their marriage, Seraphina felt the distance between their bodies as something more than physical space. It felt like a chasm. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake listening to his breathing, trying to remember the last time he touched her with anything resembling desire, trying to remember the last time he'd looked at her as something other than a political obligation wearing a crown. The memories wouldn't come. The second crack appeared during the Winter Council 3 weeks later. Seraphina sat in her designated seat at the long table, surrounded by ministers and military commanders and wealthy merchants who controlled the kingdom's purse strings. These meetings usually bored her to madness, endless discussions about tax rates and trade tariffs, but she attended every single one because that's what queens did. They showed up, they participated. They made sure their voices were heard, even when men tried to talk over them. Lord Chancellor Wickham was mid-sentence about copper imports when Duke Remington interrupted. With all respect to Her Majesty, I believe the Queen's attention might be better spent on charitable ventures rather than economic policy. The room went silent. Serafina's fingers tightened around her quill. With all respect was court language for, I'm about to disrespect you. She'd heard it 1,000 times, usually right before some nobleman suggested she stick to embroidery and leave the real work to men. I've negotiated 17 trade agreements in the past 4 years, Duke Remington. Which charitable venture exactly do you think requires more expertise than preventing economic collapse? Her voice came out level and cold. The Duke smiled. That particular smile men wore when they thought they were being patient with an emotional woman. Of course, Your Majesty, no one questions your contributions, but perhaps the delicate nature of these negotiations would benefit from a masculine perspective, meaning his perspective, meaning he wanted control of trade routes that would make him obscenely wealthy while the crown's influence diminished. Serafina opened her mouth to dismantle him with facts and figures, and the kind of sharp political maneuvering that had kept this kingdom from 3 separate wars. But Lucien spoke first. The Duke makes a fair point. 5 words. 5 words that punched the air out of Serafina's lungs. She turned to look at her husband. Her king. Her partner who'd stood beside her through coup attempts and assassinations, and nobles who'd tried to undermine them both. Lucien wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the papers in front of him, his expression carefully neutral. Perhaps it would ease your burden, Serafina, if the council took on more of the trade responsibilities. You've been working so hard lately. Ease her burden, like she was a fragile thing that needed protecting instead of the woman who'd personally negotiated the Southern Alliance while he was busy drinking himself stupid at hunting lodges. Your Majesty, she said carefully, these agreements bear my personal seal. The foreign delegations trust my word, and they'll trust the council's word just as well. He still wasn't looking at her. Around the table, she could see it happening. The slight shifts in posture, the exchanged glances, the way power was already bleeding away from her position and pooling elsewhere. Duke Remington looked like he'd won a prize. Minister Blackwell, who'd always been loyal to the crown, stared at his hands and said nothing. Commander Thorne, who'd fought beside Serafina during the Riverlands Rebellion, wouldn't meet her eyes. She was being erased in real time, and her own husband was holding the door open. Evelyn found her in the gardens afterward. Serafina was standing among the winter roses, their petals brown and dying but still clinging stubbornly to thorned stems. She'd come here to breathe, to think, to figure out what the hell had just happened in that council room. Your Majesty? Evelyn's voice was soft. Always soft. That's what Serafina had loved about her, that gentleness in a palace full of sharp edges and sharper tongues. Not now, Evelyn. I brought wine. I don't want wine. But Evelyn stayed anyway, standing close enough that Serafina could smell her perfume. That same floral scent that had clung to Lucien's clothes weeks ago. The realization hit like a fist to the stomach. Serafina turned slowly, really looked at her attendant for the first time in months, saw the expensive pearl earrings that shouldn't be affordable on a servant's wages, saw the silk dress that was far too fine for someone who spent their days lacing up someone else's corsets, saw the way Evelyn's hand moved unconsciously to her collarbone, to that same spot where bruises had bloomed and faded a dozen times. Where are those earrings from? Serafina asked quietly. Evelyn's hand dropped. A gift, Your Majesty. From whom? I don't recall. Liar. The word sat on Serafina's tongue, but she swallowed it, because saying it out loud would make it real, and making it real meant acknowledging that the 2 people she trusted most in this world had been breaking her trust in the most intimate way possible. Leave me, she said. Your Majesty, I said leave. Evelyn left, but not before Serafina saw it. That flash of something in her attendant's eyes. Not guilt, not shame. Triumph. Small and quickly hidden, but there. Plots. The third crack appeared as an accusation. Serafina was reviewing military deployment reports when Lord Chancellor Wickham requested an urgent audience. She granted it immediately because Wickham had served the crown for 30 years, and urgent usually meant something was actively on fire. He entered her study with 3 other ministers. Their faces were grim. Your Majesty, we've received troubling information. Serafina set down her quill. What kind of information? Wickham placed a leather folder on her desk. Documents, he said. Correspondence between yourself and Lord Garrett of the Northern Territories. Lord Garrett was a known separatist, a nobleman who'd been advocating for Northern independence for the past decade. Serafina had never spoken to the man in her life. I've never corresponded with Garrett, she said flatly. These letters bear your seal, Your Majesty. Then they're forgeries. Minister Blackwell stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, like a man being forced to do something against his better judgment. We had them examined by 3 separate experts. The seal is authentic. Impossible. Serafina reached for the folder, flipped it open, saw her own handwriting, her own seal stamped in red wax. Words discussing troop movements and strategic vulnerabilities and promises of support for Northern succession. Her hand started shaking. This is a lie, she said. Someone forged these. Your Majesty, Wickham said gently, we understand this is difficult. Difficult? You're accusing me of treason. We're not accusing you of anything. We're simply asking for an explanation. But they were accusing her. She could see it in their faces, in the way they stood between her and the door like they thought she might run, like she was already guilty. Where is the king? She demanded. His Majesty has been informed. I want to see him, now. Wickham exchanged glances with the other ministers. That's not possible at the moment. Why not? He's discussing the matter with his advisors. I'm his wife. I'm his queen. Bring him here. Your Majesty. Bring him here. But Lucian didn't come, not that hour, not that day, not even when Serafina sent 3 separate summons, each one more desperate than the last. He stayed in his private chambers with his advisors, making decisions about her fate without her, just like he'd made decisions about his mistress without her. Tja, they arrested her at dawn. No warning, no trial, just royal guards entering her bedchamber while she was still in her nightgown, their swords drawn like she was some kind of dangerous criminal instead of a woman who'd bled for this kingdom. By order of the king, Commander Thorne said. He wouldn't look at her. Serafina laughed. It came out broken and sharp. By order of my husband, you mean? By order of your king, Thorne corrected. She wanted to fight, wanted to scream and rage and demand they remember who she was. But she could see it in their faces. They'd already stopped seeing her as their queen. She'd become something else, a traitor, a conspirator, a woman who'd tried to tear apart the kingdom she'd spent a decade protecting. The guards shackled her wrists, cold iron against skin that had only ever worn gold. They walked her through the palace in her nightgown. Servants peeked out from doorways and whispered behind their hands. Courtiers gathered in hallways to watch the fallen queen parade past in chains. Serafina kept her head high, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But when they passed the king's chambers and she saw Lucian standing in the doorway, she stopped. He was watching, just watching, his face carefully blank. Evelyn stood behind him. Her hand rested possessively on his shoulder. Finally, Serafina understood. This wasn't about treason. This wasn't about forged letters or political conspiracy. This was about replacement. About a king who'd grown tired of his warrior queen and wanted something softer, something more manageable, something that didn't challenge him or demand equality or remind him that she was just as capable of ruling as he was. So he'd manufactured her destruction. Say something, she whispered. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Behind him, Evelyn smiled, that same small, triumphant smile from the garden. Serafina laughed again, louder this time. The sound echoed through marble halls like breaking glass. You think you've won, she said, not to Lucian, to Evelyn, to the woman who'd betrayed her. You think you've taken everything from me? The guards tried to pull her forward, but she planted her feet. You haven't won anything. You've just made the worst mistake of your pathetic little life. That's enough, Thorne said quietly. No, it's not nearly enough. Serafina looked at Lucian one last time, really looked at him, saw the coward behind the crown, the weak man who'd let his mistress poison his judgment and destroy his kingdom's stability because he was too selfish to keep his vows. I stood beside you through war, she said. Through rebellions and assassinations and nobles who wanted both our heads on spikes. I bled for this crown. I killed for it. And this is how you repay my loyalty." Something flickered in Lucian's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But not enough to stop this. Never enough. The guards dragged her away. They exiled her at midday. No trial, no formal charges. Just a decree read aloud in the Capitol Square while citizens gathered to watch their queen fall. Queen Seraphina Vale is hereby stripped of her title and lands. For crimes of treason and conspiracy against the crown, she is banished from the kingdom. Any person offering her aid or shelter will be considered an enemy of the state. The herald's voice carried across the square. Seraphina stood on the platform in a rough wool dress, her wrists still shackled, her hair loose around her shoulders. They'd taken her crown, her jewelry, even her shoes. She looked out at the crowd, saw people she'd helped, people whose children she'd saved from starvation, people who'd cheered her name when she'd ridden through these same streets after the Riverland's victory. Now they spat at her feet. "Traitor!" someone shouted. The cry spread through the crowd like fire. Traitor, betrayer, liar. Seraphina wanted to scream the truth, wanted to tell them about forged letters and manufactured evidence and a king who'd chosen his whore over his wife. But her voice wouldn't work. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Commander Thorne stepped forward with the exile brand, a red-hot iron shaped like a broken crown. "This will mark you," he said quietly, "so everyone will know what you are." He pressed it against her shoulder. The pain was extraordinary. Seraphina's vision went white. Her knees buckled, but the guards held her upright, forced her to stay standing while her flesh burned and the crowd cheered. When Thorne pulled the brand away, Seraphina could smell her own cooked skin. She didn't scream. Wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The guards unlocked her shackles and shoved her toward the city gates. "Go," Thorne said, "and don't come back." Seraphina stumbled forward on bare feet. Each step sent pain shooting up her legs from stones and broken glass. Blood left footprints on ancient cobblestones as she walked through the jeering crowd. Someone threw a rock. It hit her temple, and blood ran warm down her face. Another rock. This one caught her ribs. The guards did nothing, just watched. Seraphina kept walking, one foot in front of the other, through the market district where she'd established fair trade practices. Past the hospital she'd funded with her own dowry. Beyond the orphanage that bore her name on a bronze plaque. Everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, burning behind her. She reached the gates as the sun hit its peak. The massive iron doors stood open like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. On the other side was wilderness, exile. A world that would show no mercy to a woman alone with nothing but the clothes on her back. Seraphina paused at the threshold, turned back one last time. The palace rose in the distance, white stone and golden spires catching the light, beautiful and terrible. The home she'd bled for, the throne she'd defended, the man she'd loved, all of it poison. She thought about dying out there in the wilderness, thought about how easy it would be to just lie down in the forest and let the cold take her. But then she thought about Evelyn's triumphant smile, about Lucien's silence, about all the nobles who'd conspired to destroy her because a powerful queen threatened their comfortable corruption. And something inside her, something they hadn't managed to break with their false charges and heated brands, something fundamental and furious and absolutely unwilling to disappear quietly into history, ignited. They thought they'd killed her. They'd only made her dangerous. Seraphina Vale walked through those gates and into exile. But the woman who would eventually return wouldn't be a queen. She'd be something far worse. The forest swallowed her whole. 3 days of walking with nothing but stream water and bitter roots to sustain her. 3 nights of sleeping in hollow trees while wolves circled in the darkness. Her shoulder festered where the brand had burned through skin down to muscle. Fever came and went in waves that left her shaking and delirious. On the 4th day, she collapsed. The ground rushed up to meet her, and Seraphina didn't have the strength to break her fall. Her face hit dirt and dead leaves. Blood from the infected brand soaked through her dress. "This is how I die," she thought, alone in the mud like a wounded animal. She closed her eyes, waited for the cold to claim her, but death didn't come. Instead, she heard hoofbeats, voices, hands lifting her carefully, surprisingly gentle. When Serafina forced her eyes open, she saw a face she hadn't seen in 15 years. Lord Marcus Thane, her father's closest friend, the man who'd taught her to ride when she was 7 years old, the nobleman who'd been exiled himself 10 years ago for opposing the king's war in the Eastern Territories. Marcus looked older now, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes, but his hands were steady as he pressed a water skin to her cracked lips. "Easy, little hawk," he murmured. That's what he'd called her as a child. His little hawk. "Don't try to talk yet." "How?" Serafina managed. "Been watching the capital," Marcus said. "Heard about your exile. Figured you'd come this way eventually." "Why?" "Because I remember what your father was, what you were supposed to become. And because I know exactly how Lucien Arden operates." He lifted her onto his horse. Serafina's vision swam, but she stayed conscious long enough to see other riders emerge from the trees. Men and women in worn leather armor, faces marked by exile and hard living. "We're going somewhere safe," Marcus said. "Somewhere the king's reach doesn't extend. And then we're going to have a long conversation about what you're going to do next." "I'm going to die," Serafina whispered. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "No, little hawk. You're going to survive. And then you're going to learn something very important." "What?" "How to make them regret ever letting you live." The horse started moving. Forest shadows closed around them. Behind her, the kingdom that had exiled her continued celebrating her downfall. The king probably already had Evelyn in the queen's chambers, probably already rewriting history to erase Serafina's name from royal records. They thought she was gone. They thought she was finished. But deep in the wilderness, carried by exiles and outcasts and people the kingdom had thrown away, Serafina Vale finally understood something her years as queen had never taught her. The crown hadn't made her powerful. Losing it had. And when she finally returned to claim what was hers, she wouldn't be asking for permission. She'd be taking it from their cold, dead hands. The fever broke on the 7th day. Serafina woke in a stone room lit by a single candle, her body wrapped in rough linen bandages that smelled like herbs and something astringent. The infected brand on her shoulder had been lanced and drained. She could feel the absence of poison in her blood, the way her thoughts came clearer now, sharper. A woman sat in the corner sharpening a knife. "You're awake," the woman said without looking up. "Good. Marcus was starting to think you'd sleep forever." "Where am I?" "Blackwood Keep, or what's left of it." Serafina tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her ribs where the rocks had hit her during the exile walk. She hissed through her teeth but forced herself upright anyway because lying down felt too much like surrendering. The woman finally looked at her. She was maybe 40, with a scar running from her left eye down to her jaw, and the kind of muscle definition that came from years of hard fighting. "I'm Captain Raina Cade," the woman said. "Used to command the Queen's Guard until your husband decided female soldiers were bad for morale." She smiled without humor. "That was 8 years ago," Serafina remembered. Remembered Lucien signing the decree that dismissed half the royal guard, claiming budgetary concerns. She'd argued against it, but he'd overruled her, said it was a military matter and therefore his domain. She'd let it go. Trusted his judgment. Stupid. "Why are you here?" Serafina asked. "Because Marcus Thane collects the kingdom's discarded pieces. Exiled nobles, dismissed soldiers, people your husband threw away when they stopped being useful." Raina stood and crossed to the bed. Up close, Serafina could see more scars. Burn marks on her forearms, a healed stab wound in her shoulder. "We've been waiting for you," Raina said. "For me, for the day Lucien Arden finally showed his true face." Raina's expression was hard. "We knew he'd turn on you eventually. Men like him always do. They can't stand having a woman who's stronger than they are." "I'm not stronger. I'm here. He's still on the throne. You're alive. That makes you stronger than he wanted you to be." The door opened and Marcus entered, carrying a tray of bread and dried meat. He looked at Serafina with something that might have been pride. "The little hawk lives," he said. "Don't call me that." "Why not?" "It's what you are. Small and vicious and built to survive." Serafina took the bread he offered. It was hard and stale, but she tore into it anyway, her body screaming for sustenance. She ate like a starving animal while Marcus and Raina watched. "How many?" Serafina asked between bites. How many people are here? 43 at last count, Marcus said. Nobles who opposed the king's corruption. Soldiers he dismissed for questioning orders. Merchants he taxed into bankruptcy. All of us waiting for the right moment. Waiting for what? For you to decide what happens next. Serafina laughed. It came out bitter. What happens next is I die out here in exile like all the other inconvenient people he's erased. Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed. His eyes were serious. Your father taught you better than that, he said quietly. Lord Vale didn't raise a quitter. My father's dead, and his daughter was just branded like cattle and thrown out of her own kingdom. Yes, and now you're going to use that. Use what? The fact that everyone thinks you're finished. That's the best weapon you'll ever have. Serafina stared at him. Her shoulder throbbed. Her feet were still torn up from the exile walk. Everything hurt, and she was so tired, so desperately tired of fighting battles that should have been won years ago. But Marcus wasn't wrong. The kingdom thought she was dead or dying. Lucienne thought she was broken. Evelyn probably thought she'd won everything. They'd all stopped watching, and people who stopped watching were vulnerable. What do you need from me? Serafina asked slowly. Marcus smiled. Everything. The stronghold at Blackwood Keep was half ruined and freezing cold, but it was defendable. Thick walls, hidden entrances, surrounded by forests so dense that anyone approaching would be heard hours before they arrived. Marcus walked her through it that first week, showing her what he'd built in his decade of exile. Supply caches, weapons stores, a network of informants still loyal to the old noble houses that had opposed Lucian's rise to power. Your father's allies didn't all die with him, Marcus explained as they stood in the armory. Some of us just went underground. Why didn't you help me before? When I was still queen, because you wouldn't have listened. You were too busy trying to be the perfect partner to a man who didn't deserve you. The words hit like a slap because they were true. Serafina had spent 10 years trying to prove she was worthy of the crown beside Lucian, trying to show the kingdom that a woman could rule with strength and intelligence, trying to earn respect that should have been automatic, and it had made her blind. I was weak, she said quietly. No. Marcus's voice was firm. You were loyal. There's a difference. But loyalty to someone who betrays you is just another form of suicide. Serafina picked up a sword from the rack. The balance was good, familiar. She'd learned to fight when she was 12 years old, had trained with the best sword masters in the kingdom because her father believed women should be able to defend themselves. Lucienne had hated that, had asked her to stop carrying weapons to state functions because it made her look aggressive. She'd agreed, put down her blade to make him comfortable. Another mistake in a long line of mistakes. I want to train, she told Marcus, every day until I'm faster than I was before. You're still healing. I don't care. If I'm going to survive out here, I need to be dangerous. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. Reyna can work with you. But don't expect her to go easy just because you used to be queen. Good, Serafina said. I don't want easy. I want effective. The training started the next morning at dawn. Reyna met her in the courtyard with 2 practice swords and an expression that promised pain. Show me what you remember, Reyna said. Serafina took a stance, felt her body remember the forms she'd learned as a girl. The footwork, the balance, the way a sword became an extension of your arm if you trained long enough. She attacked. Reyna blocked easily and countered with a strike that would have taken Serafina's head off if the blade had been real. Instead, it cracked against her shoulder, the same shoulder with the healing brand. Serafina gasped and stumbled back. Too slow, Reyna said. Again. They went again. And again. And again until Serafina's arm shook and sweat ran down her spine despite the cold. Every time she thought she'd found an opening, Reyna closed it. Every time she tried to feint, Reyna saw through it. You fight like a noble, Reyna said, after knocking Serafina on her ass for the 10th time. All pretty forms and court technique. I was trained by the royal sword master. That's your problem. You were trained to look good at tournaments, not to kill people who are actually trying to kill you. Serafina pushed herself up. Her hands were blistered. Her legs trembled. Everything hurt. Then teach me, she said. Reyna smiled, that predator smile that showed too many teeth. Lesson 1. There are no rules when you're fighting for your life. No honor, no fairness. Just survival. She moved faster than Serafina expected, sweeping her legs out and putting her back in the dirt before she could react. Lesson 2. The person who's willing to fight dirtier wins. Serafina tasted blood in her mouth, felt rage building in her chest, hot and wild and completely unlike the controlled anger she'd learned to display as queen. This wasn't about maintaining dignity. This was about becoming something that could hurt back. She grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it at Reyna's face. Reyna dodged, but Serafina was already moving, using the distraction to drive her shoulder into the other woman's midsection. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and practiced swords. "Better," Reyna grunted. "Now break my nose before I break yours." Serafina swung. Reyna blocked. They rolled across frozen ground, neither willing to submit. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "You might survive after all," Reyna said. The first piece of intelligence came 3 weeks later. A rider arrived at midnight with news from the capital. Marcus brought Serafina to the war room where maps covered every surface and candles burned low. "Duke Remington has seized control of the eastern trade routes," the rider reported. "He's charging tariffs that are bleeding the merchants dry." The king signed the authorization himself. Serafina studied this map. The eastern routes were her creation, treaties she'd spent 2 years negotiating. Remington was destroying them for personal profit. "What else?" Marcus asked. "Taxes have doubled in the northern provinces. People are starving. 3 villages have already sent refugees south, but the King's Guard is turning them back at the border." "Turning them back where?" "Nowhere. They're just trapped there, dying." Serafina's hands tightened on the table edge. "How many?" The rider hesitated. "Hundreds, maybe thousands by spring." This was the kingdom Lucian was building, one where nobles grew fat while common people starved, where profit mattered more than human lives, where every policy Serafina had fought to implement was being systematically dismantled. "Anything about the new queen?" Marcus asked quietly. The rider shifted uncomfortably. "The attendant Evelyn has been elevated to royal consort. Not officially married yet, but she's living in the queen's chambers, making decisions. The court's calling her Lady Marrow now, so she'd taken everything. The chambers, the title, the man. Probably sleeping in Serafina's bed, wearing her clothes, playing queen without any of the work." "Is she popular?" Serafina asked. The rider snorted. "The nobles love her because she doesn't challenge anything they do. The people hate her because she's spending gold on parties while they starve." "Good," Serafina said. "That means she's vulnerable." Marcus dismissed the rider and turned to Serafina. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking that Lucian is doing exactly what we knew he'd do, destroying everything functional so his nobles can profit. And Evelyn is making it easy because she doesn't understand how governance actually works. And if we're smart, we can use their incompetence against them." She moved to the map, started marking territories. "Here," she said, pointing to the northern provinces. "These are my father's old holdings. Duke Hammond still controls them, and he hated Lucian even before the exile. If we can get word to him—" "He'll think it's a trap," Reyna interrupted from the doorway. "You're officially a traitor. Why would he risk his neck for you?" "Because Hammond's granddaughter is starving to death with the rest of them." Serafina met Reyna's eyes. "And because I know exactly what he cares about more than politics. Family." "Family?" Marcus studied the map. "It's risky. If Hammond reports the contact, the king will know you're organizing. Then we make sure Hammond has more to gain from helping us than from turning us in." "How?" "By proving we can hurt the people who are hurting him." They sent the message through a servant who'd worked in Hammond's household before the exile. A simple note written in code only Hammond would recognize. The hawk remembers the old oaths. "Winter is coming. Will you feed your own?" 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of Serafina training until her hands bled and her body became something harder than it had been before. 3 weeks of gathering intelligence about troop movements and supply lines and noble alliances. Then Hammond's reply came. "The North remembers. Send proof." Proof meant action. Proof meant crossing the line from exile to active rebellion. Serafina called a meeting of Marcus's inner circle. 43 people crammed into the hall, most of them scarred and angry and ready to burn the kingdom down. She stood before them in borrowed armor, her branded shoulder hidden beneath leather. "You all know what Lucien Arden did to me," she said. Her voice carried through the hall. "You all know he's a liar and a coward who'd rather destroy his own queen than admit he's weak." Nods of agreement, muttered curses. But this isn't about revenge. This is about the fact that people are dying. Children are starving. Merchants are being taxed into slavery. And every single policy that protected common people from noble greed is being erased. She let that sink in. Duke Remington controls the eastern trade routes. He's the one bleeding the merchants dry. He's the one who convinced the king to exile me so he could seize power. More nods. Everyone knew Remington's role. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit his supply convoy next week, take everything he's stolen, and redistribute it to the villages he's been starving." One of the former soldiers spoke up. "That'll start a war." "We're already at war," Serafina said flatly. "The king just hasn't admitted it yet." Reyna stepped forward. "I've scouted the route. 20 guards, maybe 30. Heavily armed but predictable. If we hit them at the river crossing, we can take the supplies and disappear before reinforcements arrive." "What about witnesses?" someone asked. "We let them live," Serafina said. "We let them run back to Remington and tell him exactly what happened, that the exiled queen is still breathing and she's coming for everyone who helped destroy her." Marcus smiled. "That's a declaration." "Yes," Serafina said. "It is." They hit the convoy on a moonless night, 40 fighters against 30 guards. Swords and arrows, and the kind of desperate fury that came from people who'd lost everything. Serafina led the charge. She'd argued with Marcus about that, told him she needed to prove she wasn't just a figurehead giving orders from safety. If she wanted these people to follow her into hell, she had to be willing to walk point. The guards never saw them coming. They struck from the trees like shadows, cutting down the outer perimeter before the alarm could be raised. Serafina moved through the chaos with Reyna at her side, her sword finding gaps in armor, her body remembering every lesson from the courtyard training. This wasn't pretty. This wasn't noble. This was survival wrapped in violence. A guard swung at her head. She ducked under the blow and drove her blade up through his ribs, felt it punch through leather and flesh, felt him die on her sword. The first man she'd ever killed. There was no time to process it. Another guard coming from the left. She pulled her blade free and turned, blocked his strike, and kicked his knee hard enough to hear it snap. He went down screaming. Serafina stepped over him and kept moving. Around her, the battle was already turning. The guards were trained, but they weren't prepared for an ambush this coordinated. Within minutes, half of them were dead or wounded. The rest threw down their weapons. Reyna rounded them up while Serafina's people secured the supply wagons. Gold, food, weapons, medicine, everything Remington had been hoarding while villages starved. Serafina walked up to the guard captain. He was bleeding from a head wound but still conscious. "Tell Remington I'm alive," she said. "Tell him I'm coming, and tell him every coin he's stolen, every life he's destroyed, I'm going to repay 1,000 times over." The captain spat blood. "You're a traitor." "No. I'm what happens when you betray the wrong woman." She nodded to Reyna. The guards were stripped of their armor and left alive on the road, forced to walk back to the capital in their underclothes. By the time they reached Duke Remington, the story would have spread. The exiled queen was hunting nobles, and she'd just drawn first blood. News of the convoy attack reached the capital within days. Marcus's spies reported that Lucien had flown into a rage, that Remington was demanding troops to hunt down the rebels, that Evelyn had suggested offering a bounty for Serafina's head. But something else happened too. Villages in the Eastern Territories started finding supplies on their doorsteps, gold and grain left anonymously in the night, enough to survive the winter, enough to remember who'd helped them, enough to make them wonder if the exiled queen might actually give a damn about common people while their king let them starve. Duke Hammond sent another message. "The North is listening. What's next?" Serafina studied reports from across the kingdom, saw the pattern emerging. Lucien's nobles were consolidating power, bleeding territories dry, crushing anyone who resisted. The king himself was barely involved anymore, too busy with Evelyn to notice his kingdom fracturing. Perfect. She called another meeting. We have their attention, she told her people. Now we use it. We hit 3 more convoys this month, different nobles each time. Make them paranoid. Make them turn on each other. Someone will talk, one of the scouts warned. Someone always talks when the pressure gets high enough. Good, Serafina said. Let them talk. Let them spread rumors about the ghost queen in the forest. Let them jump at shadows. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want them scared. I want them fractured. United nobles are dangerous. Paranoid nobles eating each other alive are just convenient. Over the next month, they executed 6 raids, each one surgical, each one carefully designed to hurt a different member of Lucian's inner circle. Lord Chancellor Wickham lost a gold shipment meant to pay off his gambling debts. Minister Blackwell had his weapons cache seized the night before he planned to sell them to northern separatists. Commander Thorne's personal guard deserted after finding out he'd been skimming their wages for years. Each hit was accompanied by a message, a reminder that the exiled queen knew their secrets, that she was watching, that she remembered every single person who'd stood silent while she was destroyed. The nobles started looking over their shoulders, started suspecting each other, started making mistakes. Duke Hammond's message came on the first day of spring. I'm in. What do you need? Serafina read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment she stopped being a thorn in Lucian's side and started being an actual threat. She wrote back immediately. Troops, supplies, and your public declaration that the king is unfit to rule. Hammond's response came within a week. You'll have 200 soldiers by summer, but I need assurance you're not just chasing revenge. Serafina stared at those words. Revenge. Like wanting justice for being betrayed and exiled was somehow petty. Like defending the kingdom from corruption was a personal vendetta instead of a moral obligation. But Hammond needed to hear the right words, needed to believe she was thinking beyond her own pain. She wrote carefully, This isn't about what he did to me. It's about what he's doing to the kingdom. You've seen the starvation, the corruption, the way he's selling us piece by piece to nobles who only care about profit. I'm not asking you to help me reclaim a crown. I'm asking you to help me save what's left of the realm before there's nothing left to save. It was true. All of it. But it was also incomplete because, yes, she wanted justice, wanted Lucian to understand what it felt like to lose everything, wanted Evelyn to realize she'd traded a servant's safety for a target on her back, wanted them both to kneel. But Hammond didn't need to know that part. His reply came fast. 200 soldiers, sworn to your command. They arrive in 6 weeks. Serafina felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or just the cold satisfaction of knowing the game had finally changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was building an army. Mom, the training intensified. Reyna pushed Serafina harder, taught her how to command troops in the field, instead of just surviving individual fights. Marcus drilled her on strategy and logistics, and the art of turning potential allies against each other. You need to think like Lucien does, Marcus said during one session. Anticipate his moves before he makes them. I'm not like him. No. You're better. You still need to understand how corruption operates. He surrounded himself with people who value gold over loyalty. That means they're all for sale to the highest bidder, so we outbid him. Or we make them understand that working for him is a death sentence. Serafina studied the map of the kingdom, saw how Lucien had divided power among his nobles, creating a web of dependencies that kept them loyal through mutual greed. But greed cut both ways. A man who loved gold more than honor would betray anyone if the price was right. We need to approach Minister Blackwell, she said. Marcus frowned. He stood against you in the council because he's a coward, not because he's loyal to Lucien, and cowards can be turned. How? By offering him something he wants more than the king's approval. What does he want? His daughter. Marcus looked up sharply. Serafina continued. Blackwell's daughter married a northern lord 5 years ago. They have a child. That child is trapped in the territories Lucien's starving. Blackwell knows his grandchild is dying and there's nothing he can do about it without looking like a traitor. So we save the child. We save the child. We get it to safety, and we make sure Blackwell knows exactly who rescued his family while his king let them starve. That's manipulative. Yes, Serafina said flatly. It is, but it's also true. We're actually helping people while Lucien destroys them. If Blackwell has half a conscience left, he'll see the difference. And if he doesn't, then we make sure everyone knows he chose the king over his own granddaughter. Either way, we win." Marcus smiled slowly. "Your father would be proud. My father's dead because he trusted the wrong people. Then don't make his mistake." They extracted Blackwell's granddaughter on a night when the northern patrols were spread thin. 3 riders, in and out before anyone realized what had happened. The child was half-starved, but alive. Serafina met them personally when they returned. The girl was maybe 4 years old, thin as a rail, her eyes too big for her face. She looked at Serafina with the wariness of someone who'd learned early that adults couldn't be trusted. "You're safe now," Serafina told her gently. "I promise." The child didn't answer, just clutched the blanket they'd wrapped around her. Serafina felt something crack in her chest. This was what Lucian's kingdom had become. A place where children starved while nobles feasted. Where families were torn apart by political games and nobody with power gave a damn. She was going to burn it all down. They sent word to Minister Blackwell through encrypted channels. Let him know his granddaughter was safe. Let him know the exiled queen had saved her while his king had condemned her to death. Then they waited. Blackwell's response came 2 weeks later. A rider arrived in the dead of night with a sealed message. Marcus opened it carefully, checking for poison or traps before handing it to Serafina. Inside was a list, names of nobles who secretly opposed Lucienne, locations of weapon caches, guard patrol schedules, and a note in Blackwell's own handwriting. "I cannot undo what was done to you, but I can help ensure it doesn't continue. The king has become what I feared, what I was too cowardly to oppose. If you truly intend to restore justice, you have an ally in the capital." It was a confession and a surrender and a lifeline all at once. Serafina read it twice, her mind already racing through possibilities. "We have someone on the inside," she said. Marcus nodded. "Now we use him." Over the next months, Blackwell fed them intelligence that let them move 3 steps ahead of Lucian's forces. They knew which roads would be patrolled, which nobles were planning to increase taxes, which villages were about to be purged for suspected rebel sympathies, and they used that knowledge to stay ghosts. They'd appear out of nowhere, redistribute stolen supplies, and vanish before troops arrived. They'd rescue families marked for execution. They'd burn tax collection centers and leave messages promising that justice was coming. The common people started calling her the Crow Queen, the woman dressed in black who struck from shadows and protected the powerless. The nobles called her a terrorist. Lucian put a bounty on her head, 10,000 gold pieces for her capture, dead or alive. Evelyn reportedly laughed and said no exile could threaten a kingdom. But the kingdom was already fracturing. Duke Hammond made his declaration on midsummer, stood before his assembled court, and announced that King Lucian Arden had violated every principle of just rule, that the true queen had been exiled based on forged evidence and lies, that the North would no longer recognize the capital's authority. It wasn't quite open rebellion yet, but it was close enough. Other nobles began making similar noises, questioning royal decrees, slow-walking tax collections, suddenly remembering they had trade agreements with territories loyal to the exiled queen. Serafina watched it unfold from Blackwood Keep, her network of spies and allies growing by the week. Reyna came to her one evening while she was studying reports. "You know there's no going back from this," Reyna said. "I know. When you march on the capital, people will die. A lot of people. I know that too. And you're prepared for it." Serafina set down the report and looked at her captain, at the woman who'd trained her to kill without hesitation. "Lucian made his choice when he forged those documents," she said quietly. "Evelyn made hers when she helped him. Every noble who stood silent made theirs. I'm just making sure they live with the consequences." Reyna studied her for a long moment. "You've changed. Good. The woman I was got destroyed. This version won't make the same mistake." "What mistake?" "Trusting that loyalty means anything to people who only value power." Reyna smiled. "Then you're ready." "For what?" "To take back what's yours. And make sure everyone who took it from you understands exactly what they created." The final piece fell into place in autumn. Commander Thorne sent a secret message through Blackwell's network. He wanted to meet. "It's a trap," Marcus said immediately. Probably, Serafina agreed. But we need to know what he wants. What he wants is to capture you and collect that bounty. Maybe. Or maybe he's finally realized he's on the wrong side. They debated for hours. Eventually agreed on a meeting location. Neutral ground, both sides armed. Maximum security. Serafina rode out with 20 of her best fighters, Reyna at her side. Thorn was waiting at the abandoned mill with a dozen guards. He looked older than she remembered, tired. They faced each other across 30 feet of empty space. "You wanted to talk," Serafina said. "So talk." Thorn dismounted slowly, walked forward with his hands visible and empty. "I made a mistake," he said, "just one. I should have refused the order to arrest you. Should have demanded a trial. Should have done a lot of things I didn't do because I was a coward. And now I'm watching the kingdom fall apart. Watching good soldiers die protecting nobles who don't deserve protection. Watching children starve while the king throws parties." He stopped 10 feet away. "You were right. About Lucy Shen. About all of it." Serafina didn't move. "I don't need you to tell me I was right. I need you to pick a side. I'm picking yours." "Why?" "Because I'd rather die fighting for something that matters than live serving a king who doesn't." Serafina studied him, looked for the lie, the trap, the angle that would get her killed, but all she saw was a tired soldier who'd finally reached his breaking point. "What can you offer?" she asked. "Half the royal guard. Maybe more. They're loyal to the crown, not the man wearing it. If you can prove you're the rightful ruler, they'll follow, and if I can't prove it, then we die trying." Thorn met her eyes. "But at least we'll die knowing we tried to stop this." It was the opening she'd been building toward for months, the moment when Lucian's own forces started turning against him. Serafina extended her hand. "Then welcome to the rebellion, Commander." Thorn took it. His grip was firm. Behind him, his guards removed their royal insignia and dropped them in the dirt. And Serafina understood that they'd just crossed the point of no return. This wasn't skirmishes anymore. This wasn't raids and supply theft. This was war. The army gathered in the valley like a storm preparing to break. Serafina stood on the ridge overlooking 3,000 soldiers who'd sworn loyalty to her cause. Duke Hammond's northern forces, Commander Thorn's defected royal guards, mercenaries paid with gold seized from corrupt nobles, farmers and merchants who'd armed themselves with pitchforks and hunting bows because they were tired of watching their children starve. 3,000 against the capital's 10,000. Bad odds, but not impossible. Marcus joined her at the ridge, his armor catching the early light. "The scouts report Lucian's forces are mobilizing," he said. "They'll meet us at Ashford Plain in 3 days." "Good. That gives us time to position the archers on the high ground." Serafina turned to look at him, at the man who'd saved her life and taught her how to fight back. He looked older in the dawn light, the years of exile showing in every line on his face. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing I could do this when I didn't believe it myself." Marcus smiled. "Your father would have marched on the capital the day after his exile. You were smart enough to build an army first. That makes you better than he was. Or more patient. Patience is just another word for strategic thinking, and you've become very good at strategy." He was right. The woman who'd been exiled 8 months ago wouldn't have recognized herself now. That Serafina had trusted too easily, forgiven too quickly, believed that loyalty meant something to people who only valued power. This Serafina knew better. She'd learned that survival required calculation, that justice demanded violence, that sometimes the only way to stop corruption was to burn it out root and branch until nothing remained but ash and the possibility of something better growing in the scorched earth. Reyna approached with Commander Thorn. Both of them looked ready for war. "The men are prepared," Reyna reported. "Morale is high. They know what they're fighting for." "And the capital defectors?" Serafina asked Thorn. "Solid. Most of them served under you during the Riverlands campaign. They remember who you were before Lucian tried to erase you. Before he succeeded in erasing me," Serafina corrected. "Let's not pretend I didn't disappear for months." "You survived," Thorn said. "That's what matters. And now you're giving us a chance to fix what we should have stopped the day they arrested you." The guilt in his voice was palpable. Serafina had learned to use it, to let these men carry their shame like weapons that drove them harder into battle. But part of her understood it too. Understood what it felt like to realize you'd stood silent when you should have fought. She'd done the same thing for 10 years of marriage. Movement from the camp below caught her attention. A rider coming fast, dust rising behind his horse. That's one of Blackwell's couriers, Marcus said. They waited while the rider dismounted and climbed the ridge. He was breathing hard, his face flushed. "Message from the capital," he gasped, handing Serafina a sealed letter. She broke the wax and read quickly, then read again because the words didn't make sense the first time. "What is it?" Reyna asked. Serafina's hands tightened on the parchment. "Evelyn is pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. "She claims the child is Lucian's," Serafina continued, her voice carefully neutral. "He's announced it publicly, called it a blessing for the kingdom, a new heir to secure the succession." Marcus cursed under his breath. Thorn looked like he'd been punched. Reyna just stared at her, waiting for orders. Serafina folded the letter with deliberate precision. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the universe for this particular cruelty. Because a pregnancy meant legitimacy, meant Lucian could claim he was building a dynasty, meant the nobles who'd supported her exile could point to the coming child as proof that the king had moved on, that the old queen was irrelevant history. But another part of her, the part that had been forged in exile and tempered by months of brutal training, recognized this for what it was. A weakness. "She's lying," Serafina said. "How do you know?" Marcus asked. "Because Lucian can't have children. We tried for 10 years, consulted physicians, tried every treatment available. The problem wasn't me." "Then whose child is it?" "I don't know and I don't care. What matters is that Evelyn just gave us ammunition. If we can prove the child isn't his, we destroy any legitimacy she's built." Commander Thorn frowned. "How do we prove that?" "We're not exactly in a position to demand a royal examination. We don't need to prove it now. We just need to plant enough doubt that when we do take the capital, people are already questioning her story." Marcus nodded slowly. "Blackwell can spread rumors, suggest Evelyn's been seeing other men. Make the nobles wonder if they're about to legitimize a bastard." "Do it," Serafina said, "and make sure the story reaches the common people too. They need to understand that their king is either a fool or a liar. Either he's being cuckolded by his mistress or he's knowingly claiming another man's child as his heir. Either way, he looks weak." "Exactly." Reyna studied her. "You're not upset."
"Oh, I'm furious," Serafina said flatly. "But fury doesn't win wars, strategy does. And Evelyn just handed us a weapon she doesn't even realize she's given us." She turned back to look at the army below, 3,000 people who'd risked everything to follow her. 3,000 people who believed she could restore justice to a kingdom drowning in corruption. She couldn't afford to be the heartbroken wife anymore. That woman was dead. Had died the moment Lucian chose his whore over his queen. This version of Serafina only cared about winning. "Send the orders," she told Marcus. "We march at dawn tomorrow. And we make sure every soldier understands that we're not just fighting for the throne. We're fighting to prove that loyalty matters, that truth matters, that you can't betray everything decent and expect to keep your crown." "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus said. The title still felt strange. She hadn't worn a crown in 8 months, hadn't sat on a throne or issued royal decrees. But Marcus had started using it anyway, and slowly the rest of her forces had followed. "Your Majesty, the rightful queen, the woman who should never have been exiled." Serafina was starting to believe it might be true. They marched before dawn. 3,000 soldiers moving in formation across land Serafina had once ruled. Villages came out to watch them pass. Some people cheered, others stayed silent, afraid of choosing the wrong side in a war that would reshape the kingdom. Serafina rode at the front in black armor, her branded shoulder hidden beneath steel. She'd had the armor made specially, forged by a blacksmith who'd lost his shop to Lucian's taxes. It fit perfectly, moved like a second skin. She looked like a warrior queen from the old legends, dark and dangerous and absolutely unwilling to compromise. Duke Hammond rode beside her, his northern banners streaming in the wind. "My scouts report Lucian's forces are already at Ashford Plain," he said. "They've taken the high ground." "Of course they have." Serafina had trained some of those commanders herself during the Riverlands campaign. They knew how she thought, knew she preferred mobility over static defense. "So we don't give them a static battle," she said.
Hammond raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Something they won't expect. We split our forces. 2,000 continue toward Ashford Plain and set up camp within sight of their position. Make it look like we're preparing for a traditional engagement, and the other 1,000 circle east through the forest, hit their supply lines, burn their food stores, make them choose between holding position and protecting their resources. That's risky. If they figure out what we're doing, they won't, because they still think I fight like a queen. All ceremony and proper tactics. They don't know I've spent 8 months learning how to fight like someone with nothing to lose. Hammond smiled grimly. Your father really would be proud. My father's dead because he played by rules his enemies ignored. I won't make the same mistake. She gave the orders and watched as a third of her army peeled off into the forest under Reyna's command. The captain had argued about the split, wanted to stay by Serafina's side during the main battle. But Serafina needed someone she trusted absolutely to lead the strike force. Someone who wouldn't hesitate when it came time to burn supply wagons and kill the guards protecting them. Reyna was that someone. The remaining 2,000 continued toward Ashford Plain. By midday, they could see Lucian's army camped on the high ground exactly where the scouts had reported. 10,000 soldiers in disciplined formations, royal banners snapping in the wind. From this distance, it looked insurmountable. Commander Thorne moved his horse alongside Serafina's. They outnumber us 3-1, he said quietly. I can count. This is suicide if we engage them directly. Then it's good we're not engaging them directly. She pulled out her spyglass and studied the enemy position. Saw the command tent flying Lucian's personal standard. Wondered if he was in there right now, drinking wine and celebrating his pregnant mistress while his kingdom tore itself apart. Probably. Pull back, she ordered. Make camp 2 miles from their position. I want them to see us. Want them to think we're hesitating. Thorne relayed the orders. The army withdrew to a defensible position and started setting up camp. Tents, cook fires, all the signs of an army preparing to dig in. Lucian's forces watched from the high ground but didn't advance. Good. They were confident, thought the battle was already won. That confidence was going to get them killed. Don't. Reyna's strike force hit the supply lines at midnight. Serafina heard about it from a messenger who rode into camp with smoke still clinging to his clothes. 3 supply depots burned, the messenger reported. Few casualties among the guards. Captain Reyna reports the eastern approach is clear. Perfect. Serafina called her war council. Marcus and Thorne and Hammond gathered around the map while she outlined the next phase. Lucian's forces are now cut off from resupply. They have maybe 4 days of food left. We give them 2 days to realize how desperate their situation is. Then we offer terms. What terms? Hammond asked. Lucian abdicates. Evelyn is exiled. The nobles who supported my removal are stripped of their lands and titles. In exchange, the common soldiers are pardoned and allowed to return home. They'll never accept that. I know. But we make the offer anyway. Because when they refuse, their own soldiers will start wondering why their commanders are willing to let them starve for a corrupt king. Marcus nodded slowly. You're trying to fracture their loyalty. I'm giving them a reason to question whether Lucian is worth dying for. Most of those soldiers are conscripts, farmers and tradesmen who were forced into service. They don't want to be here. They just don't have a choice yet. So we give them one. Exactly. It was psychological warfare, the kind of tactic Lucian had used against her during the exile, except Serafina's version was backed by truth. She wasn't forging documents or manufacturing evidence. She was just forcing people to see what had always been there. Their king was corrupt. Their kingdom was dying. And the woman he'd exiled was offering them a way out. Some of them would take it, the rest would die. The offer was delivered at dawn by a rider carrying a white flag. Serafina watched through her spyglass as the messenger rode up to Lucian's command tent, watched as guards escorted him inside, watched as minutes ticked by with no response. Then the tent flap opened and the messenger came out, alone. No counteroffer, no negotiation, just dismissal. The messenger rode back across the field and dismounted in front of Serafina. His face was pale. The king says you're a traitor and a liar, he reported. He says any soldier who defects will be executed along with their families. He's offering 10,000 gold to anyone who brings him your head. Serafina absorbed that. felt the cold rage that had become so familiar settling in her chest. Lucien had just made a critical mistake. By threatening soldiers' families, he'd shown them exactly what kind of man he was. The kind who'd murder innocents to protect his throne. Some commanders would follow him anyway. But the common soldiers, the ones with wives and children waiting at home, they'd hear that threat and understand what it meant. Their king valued obedience more than their lives. "Thank you," Seraphina told the messenger. "You did well." She turned to her commanders. "Send word to our forces. Tomorrow at dawn we advance. Not to attack, just to hold position within arrow range. I want Lucian's soldiers to see our faces, see that we're not monsters. We're just people tired of watching the kingdom burn." "And if they attack?" Hammond asked. "Then we defend. But we don't initiate. We let them make the first move. Let them be the aggressors while we're the ones offering mercy." It was theater. All of it. A performance designed to win hearts and minds while the real battle happened in supply lines and broken logistics. But theater worked when the audience was desperate and the alternative was starvation. They advanced at dawn, 2,000 soldiers moving in perfect formation across Ashford Plain. Seraphina rode at the front, her black armor gleaming in the early light. They stopped 300 yards from Lucien's position, close enough to be clearly visible, far enough to avoid immediate engagement. The two armies faced each other across empty ground. Seraphina could see individual faces now in the enemy ranks. Young men mostly. Boys, really. Conscripts who'd been handed spears and told to die for their king. She stood in her stirrups and raised her voice to carry across the field. "I am Queen Seraphina Vale," she shouted. "Your rightful ruler. 8 months ago, your king exiled me based on forged documents and lies. He did this because I opposed the corruption that's destroying our kingdom, because I refused to stay silent while nobles starved common people to line their own pockets. Silence from the enemy ranks. But they were listening. I offer you this choice," she continued. "Lay down your weapons and go home. No punishment, no retribution. Just return to your families and let us handle the men who forced you into this war. Or stand with a king who's threatened to murder your wives and children if you dare question him. The choice is yours." Movement in the enemy lines. Whispers. Uncertainty. Then Lucian's voice rang out. He'd emerged from his command tent, resplendent in gold armor that probably cost more than most of his soldiers would earn in a lifetime. "She speaks of choice while leading an army of traitors and murderers," Lucien shouted. "She claims to fight for justice while burning supply depots and killing guards. Don't let her words deceive you. She's desperate, defeated. And when we crush her rebellion, every person who followed her will hang as a warning to anyone else who dares challenge the throne." It was a good speech. Confident, authoritative, everything a king should sound like. But Seraphina had spent 10 years listening to Lucian's speeches. She knew how to dismantle them. "Tell them about Evelyn," she called back. "Tell them about your pregnant mistress living in my chambers. Tell them whether that child is really yours, or if you're about to legitimize a bastard and make him your heir." The impact was immediate. Even from this distance, she could see Lucien stiffen, could see the nobles around him exchanging glances. Because everyone knew. Everyone had heard the rumors Blackwell had been spreading, and now their king was being challenged to confirm or deny them in front of 10,000 witnesses. Lucien didn't answer. That silence spoke volumes. "She's lying," he finally said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Am I?" Seraphina pressed. "Then explain why we tried for 10 years to have a child and failed. Explain why suddenly your servant mistress is pregnant within months of taking my place. Explain it to your soldiers who are about to die defending your right to make a whore's bastard your heir." It was brutal, cruel. Exactly the kind of public humiliation Lucien had inflicted on her during the exile. She'd learned from a master. "You will address your king with respect," Lucien snarled. "You're not my king. You're a coward who destroyed his own queen because she was stronger than you, and now you're going to watch as everything you stole crumbles to dust." The fury in Lucien's face was almost worth the months of exile, almost worth the brand on her shoulder and the nights sleeping in frozen forests. Almost. "Kill her," he screamed at his commanders. "Kill all of them." The order hung in the air for 3 long heartbeats. Then Commander Thorne stepped forward from Seraphina's ranks and removed his helmet so everyone could see his face. "I was the one who arrested her," Thorn called out. I followed the king's orders because I thought I was serving justice. But there was no trial, no evidence presented, just forged documents and a king who wanted his wife gone so he could install his mistress. I was wrong, and I won't make that mistake again. Other soldiers started removing their helmets. Defectors from the royal guard, men who'd served under both Seraphina and Lucian and had chosen their queen. The enemy ranks started to waver. Attack! Lucian screamed. I command you to attack! But the commanders were looking at each other, calculating, wondering if following that order was worth dying for. And in that moment of hesitation, Seraphina saw her opening. She raised her sword. For the kingdom, she shouted. Her army roared back the words. The sound rolled across Ashford Plain like thunder. And then the first enemy soldier dropped his spear and walked away. Then another, then 10, then 100. The desertion spread like wildfire through Lucian's ranks, common soldiers abandoning their posts and streaming away from the battle line, some toward Seraphina's forces, some just running for home. The nobles were screaming orders, but nobody was listening anymore. Seraphina had won without fighting. She'd won with words and truth, and the simple reality that most people would rather live than die for a corrupt king. Lucian stood in front of his collapsing army, his gold armor glinting in the sun, and for the first time in their entire marriage, Seraphina saw real fear in his eyes. Then the explosion came from behind her. The blast knocked Seraphina off her horse. She hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her vision swimming, smoke everywhere, screaming, the acrid smell of burning flesh. She forced herself to her knees and looked back at her army. The center had been destroyed. Bodies everywhere. Dozens dead. Maybe hundreds. The survivors were scattered and panicking. What the hell? Marcus appeared through the smoke, blood running down his face. Betrayal, he gasped. Someone planted explosives in our supply wagons. They were triggered when... He didn't finish. Another explosion tore through the left flank. Seraphina's army disintegrated into chaos, and across the field, Lucian's forces regrouped and charged. They barely made it back to the forest. What remained of Seraphina's army scattered in every direction, chased by royal forces who'd found their courage now that the rebels were broken and bleeding. Seraphina rode hard with maybe 200 survivors. Marcus, Thorn, Hammond. Reyna had appeared from somewhere covered in ash and rage. They'd lost everything in less than an hour. 2,000 soldiers reduced to 200, their supplies destroyed, their momentum shattered, and someone in their inner circle had betrayed them. They took shelter in a cave network Reyna knew about, posted guards, started counting casualties. The numbers were devastating. Seraphina sat against the cave wall and stared at nothing. Her ears still rang from the explosions. Her hands shook. She'd been so close to victory, had watched Lucian's army fall apart right in front of her. And then someone had pressed a button and killed her revolution in fire and blood. Who? She whispered. Marcus shook his head. I don't know. The charges were placed perfectly, timed to cause maximum damage. Someone who knew our formations, our supply positions. It was one of us. The words hung in the cave like an accusation. Seraphina looked around at the survivors, saw exhaustion, grief, shock, but also saw the possibility of betrayal in every face because anyone could have done this. Anyone could have sold them out for gold or mercy or promises of power in Lucien's new order. Trust was dead. Hammond spoke up from the shadows. I know who it was, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The Duke looked older than he had that morning. Looked like a man carrying impossible weight. My son, he said. Lucian got to my son. Promised him the Northern Territories if he sabotaged the attack. Marcus went to my son for help coordinating the supply wagons. My son placed the explosives personally. The silence was absolute. Where is he now? Seraphina asked. Dead. I killed him myself when I realized what he'd done. Hammond's voice cracked. But it doesn't matter. The damage is done. Seraphina closed her eyes, felt the last piece of her old self die. She'd believed in family, believed that blood loyalty meant something, believed that people fighting for justice would put the cause above personal gain. She'd been wrong about all of it. The kingdom didn't want justice. It wanted comfort, wanted the security of knowing where power lay, even if that power was corrupt. and her own allies would betray her the moment someone offered them a better deal. She understood now with perfect clarity what it took to win. Not honor, not loyalty, not even courage. Just the willingness to become something worse than your enemies. Something that didn't trust, didn't forgive, didn't make the mistake of thinking other people's humanity meant they'd do the right thing. Serafina opened her eyes, looked at the 200 survivors who'd followed her this far. "We're done playing by rules," she said. Her voice was different, colder, emptied of everything except purpose.
No more mercy, no more pardons, no more offering choices to people who'll betray us the first chance they get. "What are you saying?" Marcus asked carefully. "I'm saying we burn it all down. The nobles, the corrupt guards, every single person who chose Lucian over justice. We hunt them one by one, and we make examples that will terrify anyone else who thinks about crossing us."
"That's not who you are," Thorne said.
"No, it's who I have to become.
Because the woman I was just got 2,000 people killed."
She stood. Her black armor was dented and scorched, but still intact. Lucian wanted a war. He's going to get one. But not the kind he's expecting. Not armies meeting on battlefields. Something darker. Something that comes in the night and leaves nothing but corpses and warnings.
"You're talking about terrorism," Hammond whispered. "I'm talking about survival. About making them afraid to close their eyes. About proving that exile didn't break me. It just removed the last thing holding me back." Reyna smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Finally, the captain said. Serafina looked at her remaining commanders, saw the moment they understood what she was offering. Not justice anymore. Vengeance. And every single one of them chose to follow her into the dark. They became ghosts for 3 months. 200 soldiers moving through the kingdom like smoke, striking without warning and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. No more pitched battles, no more honorable engagements. Just targeted violence designed to make Lucian's nobles understand that supporting a corrupt king had consequences. Lord Chancellor Wickham was the first. They found him in his estate outside the capital, surrounded by guards who thought stone walls and locked gates meant safety. Serafina's forces came over the walls at midnight, silent as death. The guards died in their sleep. Wickham woke to find Reyna's blade at his throat. "The forged documents," Serafina said, standing at the foot of his bed. "Who created them?" Wickham's eyes were wide with terror. "I don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer." She nodded to Reyna. The captain pressed her blade just hard enough to draw blood. "I'll ask once more. Who forged the documents that exiled me?" "Minister Blackwell," Wickham gasped. "He had access to your seal. The king ordered it. I swear I only verified them. I didn't know they were false. Liar." Serafina leaned closer, saw the truth in his eyes. The calculation. The moment he'd chosen personal advancement over justice.
"You knew," she said quietly. "You knew, and you did it anyway, because the king promised you power. Please. I have a family. So did the children starving in the north while you embezzled grain shipments. So did the merchants you taxed into bankruptcy. So did I before your king destroyed everything I'd built." She straightened. "You made your choice, Wickham. Now live with it, or don't." They left him hanging from his own gate at dawn with a sign around his neck. Corruption has consequences. The message spread through the kingdom faster than wildfire. The exiled queen wasn't asking for mercy anymore. She was taking payment in blood. What's it? Duke Remington was next. They caught him on the road between his estates, traveling with a convoy of gold stolen from Eastern merchants. 50 guards. Armored carriages. Every precaution a paranoid noble could take. It wasn't enough. Serafina's archers hit them from the forest, dropping guards before they could form defensive positions. Then her cavalry charged through the chaos, cutting down anyone who tried to fight back. Remington survived the initial assault, tried to run on foot through the trees like a coward. Marcus brought him down personally. They dragged the Duke back to the road and threw him at Serafina's feet. His expensive clothes were torn and muddy. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. "Please," he begged, "I'll give you anything." Gold, land, information about the king's plans. Serafina dismounted and crouched in front of him, looked at the man who'd stolen her trade agreements and turned them into instruments of oppression. "You stood in that council chamber and told me my work would be better handled by a masculine perspective," she said. "Remember that. I was wrong."
I'm sorry. No, you were honest. You showed me exactly what you valued. Power over justice, profit over human lives, and you thought your gender made you superior. She stood. I'm going to show you what superiority actually looks like. They stripped him of everything. His gold, his armor, his clothes. Left him naked and shivering in the mud. Walk back to the capital, Serafina told him. Tell Lucien that I'm coming for everyone who helped him destroy me. Tell him I remember every face, every vote, every silent agreement, and I'm collecting debts with interest. Remington stumbled away into the forest, broken and humiliated. Behind him, Serafina's forces redistributed his gold to the merchants he'd stolen from. Sent riders to eastern villages with enough coin to survive the winter. The common people started calling her the Avenging Queen, the woman who punished corrupt nobles and protected the powerless. The nobles started calling her the Black Death, the monster in human form who couldn't be reasoned with or bought. Both names were true, because Serafina had learned the most fundamental lesson of power. People respected strength. They obeyed fear. And if you wanted to rebuild something broken, you first had to demolish everything holding the rot in place, even if that meant becoming the kind of ruler who ruled through terror instead of love. She'd tried love, had tried partnership and loyalty and trust. It had gotten her exiled and branded like cattle. This new approach was working better. Minister Blackwell was different. He'd been feeding them intelligence for months, had saved his granddaughter, had proven his loyalty through action, but he'd also forged the documents that destroyed her. Serafina found him in a safe house Marcus had arranged, surrounded by guards who thought they were protecting an ally. She walked in alone at dawn while everyone slept. Blackwell woke to find her sitting beside his bed, her sword resting across her knees.
Your Majesty, he whispered. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Serafina studied him in the gray morning light, saw an old man who'd made terrible choices and spent months trying to atone for them, saw genuine remorse, genuine effort to make things right, saw that none of it mattered. You forged the documents, she said. Not a question, a statement. Blackwell's face crumpled. Yes. The king ordered it, said you were becoming too powerful, too independent, that you threatened the stability of his rule. And you agreed. I thought I was protecting the kingdom. Lucien convinced me you were planning to seize full power, that you'd marginalize him and rule alone, so you destroyed me to save him. I was wrong. I know that now. I've spent months trying to make amends. Serafina let that sit between them. You saved my life with your intelligence, she said, finally. You helped topple Remington. You've proven your value. Then you'll spare me. No. The word dropped like a stone. Blackwell's hand started shaking. Your Majesty, please. I have a daughter, a grandchild. So did the families torn apart by the exile you facilitated. So did the merchants destroyed by the nobles you empowered. So did I before you helped erase my entire existence. But I helped you. I gave you information. Yes. And that's the only reason you'll die quickly instead of slowly. She stood. You made a choice, Minister Blackwell. You chose to believe a corrupt king over your own conscience. You chose personal safety over justice. And now you're learning that some choices can't be undone with months of good behavior. Please, not in front of my guards. They think I'm loyal to you. They are loyal to me. They just don't know yet that loyalty doesn't erase guilt. Serafina drew her sword. Blackwell closed his eyes. The blade was clean and quick. He died without suffering because despite everything, Serafina still remembered that he'd tried to make amends, that his information had saved lives. But trying wasn't enough anymore. Actions had consequences. And the consequence of forging documents to exile your queen was death. She left the body for his guards to find, left a note explaining exactly why Minister Blackwell had died despite his months of service. Justice doesn't forget the first crime. The message was clear. Even allies weren't safe if they'd betrayed her before. Even helpful informants would pay for their original sins. It was brutal, unforgiving, exactly the kind of rule that would make people think twice before crossing her. Marcus met her outside the safe house. His face was carefully neutral. That was necessary, he asked quietly. Serafina wiped blood from her blade. Yes, he was helping us. He was atoning. There's a difference. And if I let one betrayal slide because the betrayer became useful later, I'm teaching people that betrayal is acceptable as long as you switch sides afterward. So no mercy. No mercy, she confirmed. Not anymore. We're past the point where mercy serves any purpose except making me look weak. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we're committed. We were committed the moment Hammond's son planted those explosives. This is just acknowledging reality. They rode back to camp in silence. Around them, the forest was waking up, birds singing, sunlight filtering through leaves, the world continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Serafina had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, had become something her younger self wouldn't recognize. A ruler who killed allies and enemies alike when justice demanded it. The question was whether the kingdom would accept that kind of queen, or whether she'd win the throne only to find herself ruling a nation that feared her too much to ever love her. She didn't know the answer, wasn't sure she cared anymore. Love hadn't protected her. Fear might. The Winter Summit came like a gift wrapped in opportunity. Every year, the kingdom's nobles gathered at the capital for a week of political maneuvering disguised as celebration. Treaties were signed, alliances formed. The business of governance conducted in ballrooms and banquet halls. Lucien announced the summit would proceed as scheduled despite the rebellion. A show of strength. A message that the exiled queen's terrorism hadn't disrupted normal order. It was the stupidest decision he'd made yet, because a summit meant every corrupt noble in the kingdom would be gathered in one place at one time, protected only by palace guards and the assumption that Serafina wouldn't dare attack the capital directly. She'd spent 3 months teaching them that assumptions were deadly. They're expecting us to hit supply lines, Reyna said during the planning session. Maybe assassinate a few nobles on the road to the summit. They're not expecting a direct assault. Because a direct assault is suicide, Commander Thorne pointed out. The palace has 5,000 guards. We have 200 fighters. 240, Marcus corrected. We picked up some new recruits after Remington. Still suicide. Serafina studied the palace maps they'd stolen from a guard captain who'd switched sides. Saw the weak points. The servant entrances. The smuggling tunnels nobles used to sneak mistresses into their chambers. We're not assaulting the palace, she said. We're infiltrating it. Everyone looked at her. The summit is in 3 weeks, she continued. That gives us time to position people inside. Servants, guards, anyone with access. We put 40 fighters in the palace disguised as staff, then coordinate a strike during the opening banquet when every target is in the same room. That's still suicide, Thorne said. Even if we get inside, we'll never get out. I know. The silence that followed was heavy. You're planning a suicide mission, Marcus said carefully. I'm planning a decapitation strike. We kill Lucien, Evelyn, every noble who supported the exile, everyone who chose corruption over the kingdom's welfare. And we do it publicly in front of whatever witnesses survive. And then they kill us. Probably. But they'll remember what we died for. They'll remember that someone was willing to sacrifice everything to stop the rot. And maybe that memory will be enough to inspire the next generation to actually fix what we couldn't. This is insane, Hammond said. We've spent months building momentum, gaining support. We're close to having enough forces to actually win. No, we're not. Serafina's voice was flat. We lost that chance at Ashford Plain. Right now we're just prolonged resistance. Terrorists making nobles nervous but not actually threatening the throne. If we want to change the kingdom, we need to remove the people destroying it. All at once. All in one night. So we die. So we win. Even if we don't survive it, Reyna smiled. Finally, someone's talking sense. You're serious, Marcus said. You actually want to die. I want to matter, Serafina corrected. I want my death to mean something more than a footnote about an exiled queen who died in the forest. If I'm going to die anyway, I'd rather take every corrupt noble with me and give the kingdom a chance to rebuild clean. She looked around at her commanders, saw them processing what she was proposing, understanding that this was the end game, the final play. No one's required to come, she said. Anyone who wants to walk away can do it right now. No judgment, no consequences. You've all done enough. Nobody moved. How do we get 40 people inside the palace? Thorne asked. Serafina smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We use the one advantage we have that Lucien's forgotten about. What's that? I used to be queen.
I know every secret entrance, every hidden passage, every way to move through that palace without being seen, and I know exactly which servants can be bribed or blackmailed into helping us. She started marking positions on the map. 10 fighters come in through the laundry, another 10 through the wine cellars, 5 through the stables, 5 more through the eastern chapel entrance that nobles use for private prayers. The remaining 10, including me, walk in through the front gate. The front gate, Marcus repeated. During the summit, every noble brings a retinue. We pose as Duke Hammond's servants. His real staff will be elsewhere creating distraction. By the time anyone realizes we're not who we claim to be, we'll already be inside. And once we're in, we wait for the opening banquet. Every noble will be in the great hall, Lucien and Evelyn on the high table, guards stationed at the entrances, but not inside the hall because it's supposed to be a celebration. That's when we strike. With what? Serafina pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. Poison, fast-acting, odorless. We dose the wine servers bring to the high table. Within minutes, every noble who drinks dies. Lucien, Evelyn, the whole inner circle gone before they even understand what's happening. And us, we fight our way out if we can, die trying if we can't. Either way, the job's done. Marcus stared at her. You've changed. Yes, I have. Because the woman who believed in mercy and second chances got 2,000 people killed. This version learns from mistakes. There was no pride in her voice, no satisfaction, just cold acceptance of what she'd become. A killer, a terrorist, a queen willing to sacrifice everything, including her own humanity, to save a kingdom that had already rejected her. But rejection didn't matter anymore. Victory did. And sometimes victory required becoming the monster everyone already thought you were. When do we leave? Reyna asked. 2 weeks. That gives us time to position everyone and coordinate timing. We'll have one chance at this. One night to either change everything or die trying. Reyna nodded. I'll start selecting fighters. Choose people without families, Serafina said. People who have nothing left to lose. Because I won't lie to them about what this is. It's a suicide mission dressed up as strategy. Anyone who comes needs to understand they're not coming back. Understood. The planning session continued deep into the night, every detail mapped out, every contingency considered. By dawn, they had a plan that was equal parts brilliant and insane. Exactly the kind of plan desperate people made when conventional warfare had already failed. The 2 weeks passed like a countdown to execution. Serafina spent her days training and her nights memorizing palace layouts she already knew by heart. Reyna drilled the strike team until they could move through infiltration scenarios in their sleep. Marcus coordinated with contacts inside the capital to arrange disguises and forge documents. Hammond pulled her aside 3 days before they were scheduled to leave. This is suicide, he said bluntly. Yes. And you're fine with that. I'm resigned to it. There's a difference. Hammond studied her. You used to believe in hope. Hope got me branded and exiled. Fear and consequences get results. Is that really what you want your legacy to be? The queen who ruled through terror. Serafina turned to face him fully. My legacy is going to be the woman who stopped a corrupt king from destroying the kingdom. Whether I'm remembered as a hero or a monster doesn't matter as long as the work gets done. That's not true. You care. I used to care. Now I just want to finish this before I lose whatever pieces of myself are still worth saving. She walked away before Hammond could respond, before he could see the cracks in her armor. The exhaustion that came from months of being harder and colder and more ruthless than she'd ever imagined herself capable of becoming. Because the truth was that she did care, cared desperately, cared so much it physically hurt to think about dying before she could see the kingdom rebuilt into something worth saving. But caring made you weak, made you hesitate at critical moments, made you vulnerable to betrayal by people who recognized your compassion as something that could be exploited. So she buried the caring deep down where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. And she focused on the mission, on killing everyone who'd destroyed her, on making sure their deaths meant something even if hers didn't. They entered the capital separately over 3 days. Small groups, different routes, nobody traveling together who might be recognized as associates. Serafina came in last, riding through the gates in a closed carriage as part of Duke Hammond's legitimate retinue. She wore a servant's dress, Plain, unremarkable. Her hair hidden beneath a scarf. The brand on her shoulder covered by sleeves. Nobody looked twice at her. It was almost funny. 8 months ago, she'd ridden through these same gates wearing a crown and royal colors. Thousands had cheered, guards had saluted. Now she was invisible, just another servant coming to the capital for the winter summit. The palace looked exactly as she remembered. White stone, golden spires. Beautiful and terrible and completely unchanged despite everything that had happened. She felt nothing looking at it. No nostalgia, no grief, just cold calculation about how best to infiltrate and where to position strike teams for maximum efficiency. Reyna met her in the servants' quarters after dark. The captain had gotten in 3 days earlier and had been mapping guard rotations and identifying targets. "Everyone's in position," Reyna reported quietly. "The poison's been secured. We have servers willing to dose the wine for gold. Everything's ready." "Good. When's the banquet?" "Tomorrow night. All nobles are required to attend. Lucian's making it a mandatory attendance order because he wants to show unity. So he's gathering all our targets in one room and commanding them to be there." Serafina smiled. "He really has gotten stupid." "Power makes people stupid," Reyna said. "They start believing they're untouchable. Then tomorrow night, we teach them otherwise." They reviewed the plan one final time. 40 fighters positioned throughout the palace. Poison ready. Servers briefed. Escape routes mapped, even though they all knew escape was unlikely. Everything depended on timing and luck and the assumption that Lucien's guards had grown complacent after months of defending against external threats instead of internal ones. It should work. Probably wouldn't. But it was the best chance they had. Serafina spent that night in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The arrest, the exile, the months of training and terrorism and becoming someone she barely recognized. She thought about Lucien and wondered if he ever regretted choosing Evelyn over her. Wondered if he lay awake at night thinking about the woman he'd destroyed. Probably not. Men like him didn't waste time on regret. They just moved forward assuming their choices were always correct. She thought about Evelyn and the pregnancy that might be real or might be a lie. Thought about the child who'd either be born a bastard or grow up learning their father murdered their mother. Either way, that child was doomed. Serafina found she couldn't bring herself to care. She'd lost too much. Become too hard. Crossed too many lines to still have space for compassion toward the children of her enemies. That probably made her a monster. She'd made peace with it. The banquet started at dusk. Serafina watched from the servants' entrance as nobles flooded into the great hall wearing silks and jewels and expressions of practiced superiority. She recognized most of them, had negotiated with them, dined with them, believed some of them were allies. All of them had stood silent during her exile. All of them were about to die. The servers moved through the crowd with wine and delicacies. Musicians played in the gallery, everything perfect and beautiful and completely oblivious to what was coming. Lucien entered with Evelyn on his arm. Serafina's hands tightened on the doorframe. He looked the same, handsome, confident, every inch the king. His crown caught the candlelight. His royal robes flowed behind him like something from a painting. Evelyn wore Serafina's crown, the queen's crown that should never have touched another woman's head. She wore it like she'd earned it. Serafina felt rage so pure and absolute it almost stopped her heart. That crown had been her grandmother's, had been passed down through generations of queens who'd actually ruled instead of just playing dress-up in stolen chambers. And now a servant mistress who'd betrayed her way into power was wearing it like a trophy. Not for much longer. Lucien raised his hand and the hall fell silent. "My loyal nobles," he began. His voice carried through the space. "We gather tonight to celebrate the strength and unity of our kingdom. Despite the terrorists who seek to undermine our prosperity, despite the traitor who continues to spread lies and violence, we stand firm. We stand together." Applause. Enthusiastic and sycophantic. Serafina's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. "And tonight," Lucien continued, "I have an announcement. Lady Evelyn has given me the greatest gift, an heir to secure our dynasty's future." More applause. Nobles standing to toast the pregnant mistress. Evelyn smiled and placed a hand on her belly. The gesture was deliberate, performative. designed to cement her position as the new queen even without a formal coronation. Serafina looked at Reyna standing beside her. The captain's expression was murderous. "Now," Serafina whispered. Reyna signaled across the hall. Servants moved into position. Wine was poured. Glasses distributed to the high table where Lucien and Evelyn sat with the inner circle of nobles. Serafina watched a server she'd personally bribed pour from the poisoned bottle, watched the clear liquid fill crystal glasses, watched nobles lift them in toast to the king and his heir, watched them drink. Then she counted. The poison was supposed to take 30 seconds, fast-acting but not instantaneous, just long enough for the victims to realize something was wrong before their hearts stopped. 20 seconds. Nobles still smiling, still toasting. 25 seconds. The first one collapsed, a minister whose name Serafina had forgotten. He clutched his chest and went down hard. 30 seconds. Chaos erupted. Nobles dropping everywhere, screaming, guards rushing forward, the musicians stopping mid-song. And on the high table, Lucien stared at his wineglass in horror. Evelyn was already convulsing. "Now," Serafina said again. This time she said it loud enough to carry. 40 fighters emerged from concealed positions, servants dropping their disguises and drawing weapons, guards who'd been bribed or blackmailed turning on their fellows. Serafina walked into the great hall with her sword drawn and her face finally visible. The surviving nobles saw her and screamed. "Hello, Lucien," she said. The king stood frozen at the high table. Around him, his inner circle was dying. Evelyn had stopped moving entirely, foam at her mouth, the stolen crown askew on her head. "You," he whispered. "Me," Serafina confirmed. She crossed the hall toward him. Guards tried to stop her, but her fighters cut them down. Blood spread across marble floors that had once hosted celebrations and treaty signings. "This was supposed to be a summit about unity," she said, "about the strength of your kingdom, but all I see is corruption dying the way it should have died years ago. You're insane. No, I'm what you created when you chose to destroy me instead of ruling beside me." She was close enough now to see the fear in his eyes, see him realizing that the woman he'd exiled had become something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. "I loved you," she said quietly, "believed in you, fought beside you, and you threw me away like garbage because I threatened your ego. You were trying to seize power. I was trying to save the kingdom from men like you. But you couldn't stand having a wife who was better at governance than you were. So you manufactured treason and let your nobles destroy everything functional so they could profit." Lucien's hand moved toward his sword. "Don't," Serafina warned. He drew anyway. They fought in the middle of the great hall, while nobles died around them, and guards clashed with rebels, and the kingdom's entire power structure collapsed into blood and violence. Lucien was good, had been trained by the same sword masters who'd trained Serafina, but he'd spent the past 8 months drinking wine and celebrating his mistress, while Serafina had spent them learning how to kill without hesitation. She was better. She drove him back across the hall. Their blades rang out above the chaos. Metal on metal. Death circling death. "This is for the Ectel Goethals," she said, scoring a cut across his ribs. "For the brand, another cut on his shoulder. For every person who starved while you partied. For Evelyn's lies. For thinking you could erase me and face no consequences." Lucien stumbled, went down on one knee. Serafina stood over him with her blade at his throat. Around them, the fighting was dying down. Most of the nobles were dead. Most of the guards had fled or switched sides. Her 40 fighters had done exactly what they'd been trained to do. "Die screaming or beg," she told Lucien. "I don't care which." He looked up at her. Blood ran from a dozen cuts. His crown had fallen off somewhere during the fight. "You'll never rule them," he gasped. "They'll never accept a queen who took the throne through murder. Then I'll rule through fear instead of love. Either way, I'll rule. And you'll be a footnote about what happens to corrupt kings." She raised her sword. The doors to the great hall exploded inward. Royal reinforcements poured in, hundreds of them. Fresh guards who'd been stationed outside the palace. Soldiers loyal to the crown who'd finally realized what was happening. Serafina's fighters turned to face them, but there were too many. They'd completed the assassination, but they were outnumbered 20 to 1. "Run!" Reyna screamed, but there was nowhere to run. They were surrounded. trapped in the great hall with dead nobles and dying rebels, and a king who was still alive beneath Serafina's sword. She could kill him, could end it right now, drive her blade through his throat and complete the mission even if it meant dying 30 seconds later. Or she could run and try to survive and maybe rebuild for another attempt. The choice hung in front of her for one impossible heartbeat. Then Commander Thorne appeared at her side. "Go," he said. "We'll hold them. You'll die. We're already dead." "You're not. Go finish this." Serafina looked at Lucien kneeling beneath her blade, looked at Thorne preparing to sacrifice himself, looked at Reyna fighting through guards toward a servant exit, made her choice. She ran. Behind her, Thorne and 20 other fighters formed a defensive line and bought her escape with their lives. She heard them dying as she fled through the palace, heard their screams mixing with the sounds of steel and death, but she kept running. Through servant corridors she'd memorized, down hidden staircases, out through a smuggling tunnel that opened into the city streets. Reyna and Marcus were waiting with horses. "Go!" Marcus shouted. "Before they lock down the city!" They rode hard through the capital streets. Behind them, alarm bells rang, guards mobilized, the entire military apparatus of the kingdom waking up to hunt them down. Serafina's heart hammered in her chest. Blood soaked her clothes. Her sword was still in her hand. She'd killed maybe 30 nobles tonight, destroyed Lucien's inner circle, struck terror into every corrupt heart in the kingdom. But she'd failed to kill the king. And failure meant this war would continue, meant more death, more sacrifice, more becoming something even darker than she'd already become. They made it to the city gates just as they were closing, crashed through on horseback, guards shouting behind them, disappeared into the forest beyond the walls. And Serafina understood with perfect clarity that tonight hadn't ended anything. It had just raised the stakes to a level where only total victory or total annihilation remained. They rode through this night until the horses collapsed from exhaustion. 3 survivors: Serafina, Reyna, Marcus. Out of 40 fighters who'd infiltrated the palace, only 3 made it out alive. The rest had died buying time for an escape that felt increasingly pointless with every mile they put between themselves and the capital. They stopped in a burned-out village that had been abandoned months ago during one of Lucien's purges. No people, no witnesses, just empty buildings and the ghosts of families who'd fled or died. Serafina dismounted and immediately vomited. The adrenaline was wearing off and her body was processing what they'd done. What she'd done. 30 nobles dead. Commander Thorne dead. 20 fighters dead. And Lucien still breathing. She'd had him. Blade at his throat, one thrust away from ending it, and she'd chosen survival over completion. The realization sat in her stomach like poison. She'd become someone willing to kill allies for past betrayals, but she'd spared her enemy when it mattered most. Had let Lucien live because some pathetic survival instinct had kicked in at the critical moment. Weakness. After everything. After all the hardness she'd cultivated. Still weak when it counted. Reyna appeared beside her with a water skin. "Drink," the captain said. Serafina shook her head. "Couldn't imagine putting anything in her body right now." "That wasn't a request, Your Majesty. Drink or I'll make you." The title cut deeper than it should have. Your Majesty. Like she was still a queen instead of a fugitive terrorist who'd just failed the most important mission of her life. But she took the water and drank because Reyna was right. Survival required basic maintenance even when you wanted to lie down and let the world end. Marcus was checking their supplies. His face was grim. "We have enough food for maybe 3 days," he reported. "No gold, no weapons beyond what we're carrying, and every soldier in the kingdom is going to be looking for us by dawn." "Then we disappear," Serafina said. Her voice came out hollow. "Find somewhere remote and stay hidden until they stop searching." "And then what?" Marcus asked. "We spend the rest of our lives hiding in forests while Lucien consolidates power and makes sure nothing like tonight ever happens again. What else is there?" "We failed. The mission was to kill the king and his inner circle. We killed the circle but not the king. That's not victory. That's just expensive terrorism. We killed 30 corrupt nobles," Reyna pointed out, "destroyed his power base, proved he's vulnerable. That's not nothing. It's not enough." Serafina sat down hard against a crumbling wall, felt the weight of 8 months crashing down on her all at once. The exile, the training, the killings. The slow transformation into something she barely recognized, all of it building toward tonight, toward one perfect moment of justice. And she'd flinched, had chosen her own life over completing the mission. The woman she'd become should have killed Lucian and died content knowing the job was done. But some remnant of her old self, some piece that still valued survival over sacrifice, had made her run instead. She didn't know which version she hated more. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said gently. "Staying here is suicide." "Everything's suicide," Serafina muttered. "Running, fighting, hiding, all of it just delays the inevitable." "Then what do you want to do?" The question hung in the burned village like a challenge. What did she want? Not the throne. That much had become clear during the fight with Lucien. Standing over him with her blade ready, she'd felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the knowledge that killing him wouldn't undo what he'd done to her, wouldn't heal the brand on her shoulder or erase 8 months of becoming someone capable of murdering allies. The crown wouldn't fix her. Victory wouldn't make her whole. Nothing would. Because the woman who'd been exiled was dead, had died in that forest while fever burned through her infected brand, had been replaced by this harder, colder version who understood that power required sacrifice and justice demanded blood. But this version was tired, so desperately tired of fighting and killing and being the monster everyone needed her to be. "I want it to be over," she said finally. "I want to stop waking up planning who to kill next. I want to stop being afraid that everyone close to me is about to betray me. I want to stop carrying all of this." She gestured vaguely at herself, at the blood-soaked armor and the sword and the weight of 30 murders. "But it won't be over until Lucian's dead," she continued. "And I can't kill him from hiding, so I don't know what I want except for it to end somehow." Marcus and Reyna exchanged glances. "Then we make it end," Reyna said. "How?" "The same way we've done everything else. We find a weakness and we exploit it until something breaks. Lucian doesn't have weaknesses anymore. We killed everyone close to him, isolated him, and he's still standing." "Everyone has weaknesses," Marcus said quietly. "We just haven't found his yet." They found it 3 days later in a message that arrived by carrier pigeon. The bird landed exhausted at their temporary camp with a note tied to its leg. Marcus opened it carefully, checking for traps or poison. Then his face went pale. "What?" Serafina asked. "It's from someone inside the palace. They're offering information." "About what?" "About Evelyn's child." Serafina took the note and read it herself. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the content was explosive. "Lady Evelyn Marrow survived the poisoning. She's recovering in the royal chambers under guard. But the child she carries is not the king's. It belongs to Lord Wilhelm, one of the nobles who died at the banquet. Evelyn was having an affair with him for months. The king doesn't know. I have proof. Meet me at the old mill at midnight tomorrow if you want it." The note was unsigned. "It's a trap," Reyna said immediately. "Probably," Serafina agreed. "But if it's true, if we can prove the child isn't Lucien's, we destroy the legitimacy he's been building. We prove he's either a fool or a liar. Either he knows and is claiming a bastard as his heir, or he doesn't know and is being cuckolded by his dead mistress. Either way, he looks weak," Marcus finished. "Exactly." Serafina read the note again, felt something stirring that she'd thought was dead. Not hope, exactly. More like possibility. A crack in the armor of inevitability. "We go," she decided. "It's suicide," Reyna repeated. "Then it's suicide. But we're out of options and out of time. If there's even a chance this information is real, we have to take it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll scout the location first. Make sure it's not an ambush." "It's definitely an ambush," Serafina said. "But maybe we can survive it anyway." The old mill sat beside a river that had run dry years ago during a drought nobody had bothered to fix. The building was half collapsed, its water wheel broken and rotting, perfect place for a trap. Serafina approached at midnight with Reyna at her side and Marcus watching from the tree line with a bow. They discussed elaborate plans and careful strategies, but ultimately decided on directness. If this was their last stand, they'd face it head-on instead of sneaking. A figure waited inside the mill, hooded and hidden in shadows. Serafina drew her sword. Reyna did the same. "Show yourself," Serafina called. The figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight and pulled back their hood. Seraphina's breath caught. It was a woman she recognized from the palace, Lady Catherine Frost, a minor noble who'd always been kind to Seraphina during her time as queen, one of the few who'd looked uncomfortable during the exile. "Your Majesty," Catherine said. Her voice shook. "I'm so sorry. For everything. Why are you here?" "Because I can't watch what's happening anymore. Can't stay silent while Lucien destroys everything decent about this kingdom." She pulled out a leather folder and handed it to Seraphina. Inside were letters, correspondence between Evelyn and Lord Wilhelm, love letters, explicit descriptions of their affair, and most damning, a letter from Wilhelm to Evelyn discussing the pregnancy and his excitement about becoming a father. Dated 2 months before Lucien announced the child. "This is real," Seraphina said. It wasn't a question. "Wilhelm confessed to me the night before the banquet. He was drunk and terrified that the truth would come out. He died before he could tell anyone else. But I kept his letters because I knew they might matter someday. Why give them to me?" "Because you're the rightful queen," Catherine said simply. "Because Lucien exiled you based on lies, and I stood silent like a coward. Because the kingdom is falling apart, and someone needs to stop it." She took a breath. "And because my daughter is 6 years old, and I want her to grow up in a kingdom where honor means something, where powerful men can't just destroy good women and face no consequences." Seraphina felt something crack in her chest. This woman had risked everything to bring her proof, had walked into a meeting that could easily be her execution because she believed justice mattered more than safety. It was the kind of courage Seraphina had stopped believing existed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "What will you do with the letters?" "I don't know yet, but they change everything." Catherine nodded. "There's something else you should know. Evelyn survived the poison, but she's weak, fragile. The physicians say she might not survive childbirth, and Lucien is desperate to ensure the succession. He's planning to marry her formally within the month. Marry her. A royal wedding. Public vows. Making the child legitimate before anyone can question its parentage." "When?" 3 weeks. He's already sent invitations to every noble in the kingdom, commanded their attendance. It's supposed to be a show of strength, proof that the assassination attempt failed to weaken him. Seraphina looked at the letters in her hands, looked at Catherine standing in the ruined mill risking everything for a chance at justice, looked at Reina and Marcus waiting for orders, felt the pieces falling into place. She'd failed to kill Lucien at the banquet, had let survival instinct override completion, but maybe that failure had created an opportunity. Maybe staying alive meant she could finish this a different way, not through murder, through truth. "Tell me about the wedding," she said. The planning took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of gathering intelligence and positioning people and crafting a plan that was somehow more audacious than the assassination attempt. Because this time Seraphina wasn't planning to kill anyone. She was planning to reclaim her throne through the law. The kingdom's founding charter was clear. A monarch could be challenged by direct petition during any public ceremony where nobles were gathered. It was an old law, rarely used, designed to prevent tyranny by allowing the people's representatives to question their ruler's fitness. Lucien's wedding qualified, and Seraphina had proof that he was either a fool being manipulated by a pregnant mistress or a liar knowingly legitimizing a bastard heir. Either way, grounds for questioning his fitness to rule. It was insane, walking into a royal wedding surrounded by guards who wanted her dead and challenging the king in front of every noble in the kingdom. But it was also legal, constitutional, the kind of move that couldn't be dismissed as terrorism or rebellion. If she did it right, if she presented the evidence clearly and forced Lucien to respond publicly, she could destroy him without spilling another drop of blood. Marcus thought it was brilliant. Reina thought it was suicide. Catherine thought it was the only way to actually change things, instead of just perpetuating violence. Seraphina thought it was probably all three. But she'd spent 8 months becoming a killer, and it had only made things worse. Had created a cycle of vengeance that would continue until everyone involved was dead. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe the strength she needed wasn't the ability to kill without hesitation. Maybe it was the courage to stand in front of her enemies unarmed and trust that truth mattered enough to protect her. It was a terrifying thought, also possibly the only one that might actually work.
Tolus saji
The royal wedding took place on the first day of spring. The palace courtyard had been transformed into something from a dream. White flowers everywhere, musicians in the galleries, hundreds of nobles dressed in their finest silks. Lucien stood at the altar in gold and crimson, his crown gleaming in the sunlight. He looked like every fairy tale king, handsome and powerful and absolutely confident. Evelyn walked down the aisle on Duke Remington's brother's arm, since Remington himself was dead. She wore white and silver. Her belly was visibly swollen with the pregnancy. The stolen crown sat on her head like she'd been born wearing it. Serafina watched from the crowd. She'd walked in through the front gates wearing a noble's dress borrowed from Catherine. Her hair was styled differently, her face partially hidden behind a veil, but her branded shoulder was visible, deliberately exposed beneath the sleeveless gown. Nobody had recognized her yet. The guards were watching for terrorists and assassins, not for an exiled queen walking openly among the guests. The ceremony began. Traditional vows, promises of love and loyalty and partnership, every word a mockery of what Serafina and Lucien had supposedly shared. She let them get halfway through. Then she stepped forward. "I invoke the right of petition," she called out. Her voice carried across the courtyard. Hundreds of heads turned. Guards reached for weapons. "Under the founding charter, I challenge this marriage and the fitness of King Lucien Arden to rule." Chaos erupted. Nobles shouting, guards converging, Lucien's face going white with rage. But the law was the law. And there were enough old nobles present who remembered the charter and wouldn't let it be violated even for a king they supported. The High Chancellor stepped forward, an ancient man who'd served 4 monarchs and took constitutional law seriously. "Who makes this petition?" he demanded. "I do," Serafina said. She pulled off her veil. "Let everyone see her face. Let them see the brand on her shoulder and the scars she'd earned in exile. Queen Serafina Vale, rightful ruler of this kingdom, exiled on false charges by a king who wanted to replace me with his mistress." The courtyard went dead silent. Lucien found his voice. "She's a traitor, a murderer. Arrest her immediately." "You can't arrest someone making a legal petition," the High Chancellor said. His voice was dry. "The law is clear. She has the right to be heard." "This is absurd," Evelyn hissed. "She's trying to ruin our wedding out of jealousy." Serafina ignored her, focused on the High Chancellor. "I have proof," she said, "that King Lucien is knowingly legitimizing a bastard child, that the woman he's marrying has been unfaithful, and the child she carries belongs to Lord Wilhelm, not the king." She held up the letters Catherine had given her. Love letters between Lady Evelyn and Lord Wilhelm, including explicit discussion of the pregnancy and Wilhelm's paternity, all dated months before the king announced the child. The crowd erupted again, this time in shock instead of outrage. "Those are forgeries," Lucien shouted, "just like the documents you supposedly used to frame yourself." "Then have them examined," Serafina said calmly. "Bring in every expert in the kingdom, test the ink, verify the handwriting." "I'll wait." She met his eyes across the courtyard. "Unless you'd rather marry her now and hope nobody asks questions later. Hope your nobles accept a bastard heir because you commanded it. Hope the kingdom doesn't fall apart when people realize their king is either a fool or a liar." Lucien's hands were shaking. Serafina could see it from here, could see the moment he understood that she'd outmaneuvered him. If he proceeded with the wedding, he looked weak. If he stopped it, he admitted doubt. Either way, he lost. Evelyn turned to him. Her face was pale. "Lucien, tell them she's lying." But Lucien was staring at the letters in Serafina's hands, calculating, wondering if they were real, wondering if Wilhelm had actually betrayed him, wondering if the child he'd announced as his heir was actually another man's bastard. The silence stretched. Then Evelyn made a mistake. She grabbed Lucien's arm. "The child is yours. I swear it." Wilhelm meant nothing. It was just a few times. It didn't mean anything. The courtyard went absolutely silent. Evelyn realized what she'd said, tried to backtrack. I never... Those letters are false. I was faithful." But it was too late. She'd confirmed the affair in front of hundreds of witnesses. Lucien pulled his arm away from her like she was diseased. "Get away from me," he said. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. I did it for us." Wilhelm had information about the northern nobles. I had to get close to him. It was strategy. You slept with him. To get intelligence. To help you. And got pregnant. Evelyn opened her mouth. Closed it. No words came out because there was no explanation that would make this better. Lucien turned to the High Chancellor. His face was a mask. Postpone the wedding, he said, until the letters can be verified. It was an admission, not of guilt exactly, but of doubt, of the possibility that he'd been deceived. Serafina pressed her advantage. And what about my exile, she asked. What about the forged documents used to destroy me? Will those be examined too? The crowd murmured. Some nobles looked uncomfortable. Others looked calculating. Because everyone knew now. Knew that if Evelyn had lied about the pregnancy, she'd probably lied about other things. That if Lucien had been fooled once, he'd probably been fooled before. That maybe the exiled queen wasn't a traitor after all. Maybe she'd been telling the truth all along. The High Chancellor looked at Lucien. Your Majesty, what is your response to these accusations? Lucien's jaw was so tight, Serafina thought it might crack. My response is that this woman is a terrorist who murdered 30 nobles, who led an assault on this palace, who has forfeited any right to question my rule. I was exiled first, Serafina said, before any of that. The murders and the assault came after you destroyed me based on lies. So which came first? Your corruption or my response to it? You tried to seize power. I tried to govern fairly. You couldn't stand having a wife who was better at it than you were. The nobles were watching now like this was theater, which it was. The best political theater Serafina had ever performed. She took a step forward, closer to the altar, closer to Lucien. Here's what I think happened, she said. Her voice carried across the courtyard. I think you grew tired of being questioned, tired of having a queen who actually cared about justice, instead of just looking pretty beside you. So when Evelyn offered you someone more manageable, someone who'd agree with everything you said, you took it, had documents forged, convinced your nobles that I was the problem, and exiled me to make room for her. That's not true. Then explain the documents. Explain how they appeared with my seal when I never wrote them. Explain why Minister Blackwell confessed to forging them before he died. Explain any of it without admitting you manufactured my exile. Lucien couldn't. Serafina could see it in his face, see him realizing that she'd backed him into a corner where every defense made him look worse. The High Chancellor cleared his throat. Given the serious nature of these allegations, he said, I invoke the Council's right to investigation. Both the letters regarding Lady Evelyn's child and the documents regarding Queen Serafina's exile will be examined by independent experts. Until such examination is complete, all ceremonies and major royal decisions are suspended. It was as close to a victory as Serafina could get without violence. The wedding was stopped. Lucien's authority questioned, Evelyn exposed as unfaithful at minimum, and Serafina standing in front of everyone alive and undefeated. She turned to leave, had made her point, planted enough doubt to fracture Lucien's support, but Lucien's voice stopped her. You think you've won, he said. His voice was raw, broken. Think you've destroyed me with words and legal procedures, but you're still a murderer, still the woman who poisoned 30 people at a banquet, and that doesn't go away just because you made me look bad at my wedding. Serafina turned back, looked at the man she'd once loved, saw nothing there worth saving. You're right, she said quietly. I am a murderer. I killed people who chose corruption over justice, who stood by while innocents starved, who destroyed lives to protect their power. And I'd do it again. She paused. But the difference between us is that I own what I've become. I don't hide behind crowns and ceremony and pretend my hands are clean. You're a coward who destroys people and claims it's for the kingdom. I'm a killer who knows exactly what I am. Which one of us do you think the kingdom will choose? She walked away before he could answer. Behind her, the wedding that should have legitimized his rule collapsed into chaos, and Serafina felt something shift, not victory, not triumph, just the exhausted relief of knowing she'd finally fought back without losing more pieces of herself. She'd used truth instead of violence, law instead of murder. It might not be enough, might not win her the throne, but at least she'd stopped becoming something worse. The investigation took 2 months. 2 months of Serafina living in safe houses while experts examined documents and interviewed witnesses. 2 months of the kingdom fracturing as nobles chose sides. 2 months of Lucian's support eroding like sand beneath a wave. The results came during the summer council. The High Chancellor presented his findings to the assembled nobles with Serafina and Lucian both present under heavy guard. Regarding Lady Evelyn's child, the Chancellor said, "The letters are authentic. Lord Wilhelm's handwriting has been verified by 3 independent experts. The timeline confirms that the child cannot be the king's based on conception dates, and the king's documented absences from the capital during the relevant period. Evelyn wasn't present, had fled the capital weeks ago when it became clear the investigation would expose her. The child is a bastard," the Chancellor continued. "Any attempt to legitimize it as a royal heir would be fraud." Lucien sat rigid in his chair, said nothing. Regarding Queen Serafina's exile, the Chancellor continued, "The documents used to charge her with treason were indeed forgeries. Minister Blackwell's confession has been corroborated by physical evidence. The exile was unlawful." He looked at Serafina. Queen Serafina Vale was wrongfully removed from the throne. Under our laws, she retains her title and rights as co-monarch. The council chamber erupted. Serafina sat very still, trying to process what she was hearing, that she'd been right, that the exile had been manufactured, that 8 months of hell had been based on lies she'd always suspected but never been able to prove, that she was still the queen. However, the Chancellor said loudly over the noise, "Queen Serafina has admitted to multiple murders during her exile, to leading an assault on the palace, to poisoning nobles at a state function. These crimes cannot be ignored." He looked at both of them now. Lucien and Serafina, king and queen, partners who destroyed each other. "I recommend the following resolution," he said. "King Lucien will abdicate. His unlawful exile of the queen and his attempt to legitimize a bastard heir constitute gross violations of his oath. Queen Serafina will assume sole rule but will face trial for the murders committed during her exile. The council will determine appropriate consequences for her actions while acknowledging the circumstances that drove them." It was the most diplomatic fuck you Serafina had ever witnessed. Lucien would lose everything, but Serafina would have to answer for what she'd become in response. Fair, brutal, exactly what they both deserved. Lucien stood abruptly. His chair fell backward. "I won't abdicate," he said. "I am the king. You can't remove me based on the word of a murderer." "We can and we will," Duke Hammond said from the back of the chamber. He'd arrived 3 days ago with what remained of the northern forces. "Your lies destroyed this kingdom. Your corruption has killed thousands. The only question is whether you leave the throne alive or dead." Lucien looked around the room, saw noble after noble refusing to meet his eyes, saw his support evaporating in real time, saw that he'd finally lost. "Fine," he spat. "Take it. Take the crown and the kingdom and the responsibility of trying to fix everything that's broken. See how long you last before they turn on you too." He tore off his crown and threw it on the floor. Then he walked out. Guards followed to escort him to exile. The same exile he'd inflicted on Serafina. The same brand on his shoulder that she carried. Justice, poetic and painful. Serafina picked up the crown from where it had fallen, felt the weight of gold and responsibility and all the deaths it had taken to get here. The Chancellor approached her carefully. "Your Majesty," he said, "do you accept the Council's recommendation?" Serafina looked at the crown in her hands, thought about what it had cost. Commander Thorne dead. Blackwell dead. 30 nobles dead. Hundreds of common soldiers dead. All because 2 people who should have ruled together chose pride and betrayal instead. "I accept," she said. "But I want one thing added to the resolution." "What?" "A truth commission. Every noble who participated in my unlawful exile will testify publicly about what they did and why. Every bribe, every threat, every moment they chose power over justice. All of it exposed so the kingdom understands how corruption operates and how to recognize it. And you'll face trial for your murders. Yes. Full accounting, public testimony. Whatever consequences the law demands, I won't hide from what I became any more than I'll let them hide from what they did." The Chancellor nodded slowly. "Agreed. The truth serves everyone better than silence. Then let's rebuild this kingdom on honesty for once. See if it survives better than the version built on lies." Bukan. But the trial lasted 3 weeks. Serafina testified about everything: the exile, the months in the forest, the training, the decision to become a killer instead of a victim. She didn't minimize it, didn't make excuses, just told the truth about what she'd done and why. The council listened, deliberated, returned with a verdict that surprised no one. Guilty of murder, guilty of assault, guilty of poisoning, but with extreme circumstances that explained, if not excused, the actions. The sentence was unprecedented. Serafina would rule as queen, but under council oversight for 5 years. Every major decision reviewed, every policy examined. Proof that she could govern justly instead of through revenge. After 5 years, if she'd proven herself, full authority would be restored. It was probation. For a queen. Humiliating and necessary and exactly right. Serafina accepted it without argument. Then she got to work. The kingdom healed slowly. Serafina dismantled the corrupt systems one by one, replaced nobles who'd used their positions for profit, rebuilt trade routes, restored fair taxation, fed the starving provinces. It was exhausting, harder than fighting, harder than surviving exile, but it was also the work she'd been trained for, the governance she'd always believed in. And slowly, the kingdom started to believe in it too. Not everyone. Some nobles hated her. Some common people feared her. The woman who'd poisoned 30 nobles would never be universally loved, but she was respected, feared in a way that prevented corruption instead of enabling it. And gradually, as years passed, people started to see her not as the exiled queen or the terrorist rebel, but as the woman who'd been willing to become a monster to stop worse monsters. Reina became her head of security, Marcus her chief advisor, Catherine her liaison to the noble houses. They built something new together, not perfect, but functional, honest, better. Evelyn was never found, disappeared somewhere beyond the kingdom's borders with a bastard child and whatever guilt she carried. Lucien died in exile 3 years after his abdication, old and broken and alone. Serafina felt nothing when she heard. The revenge she'd chased for so long turned out to be meaningless compared to the satisfaction of actually fixing what he'd broken. 5 years after her trial, the council voted unanimously to restore her full authority. Queen Serafina Vale sat on her throne that day and looked out at a kingdom that had nearly destroyed itself. That had nearly destroyed her. And understood finally what real power meant. Not the ability to kill your enemies. Not the crown or the title or the fear. Real power was the choice to become better after the world tried to make you worse. Was the courage to build instead of destroy. Was looking at all the reasons to be bitter and choosing purpose instead. She'd been exiled, branded, betrayed by everyone she trusted, and she'd survived it. Not just survived, but used it to become someone who actually deserved the throne she'd almost lost. The woman who'd been destroyed in exile was gone, had died in the forest along with her naivety and trust. But this version, scarred and hard and unflinching, this version could rule a broken kingdom and make it whole. Not through fear, not through vengeance, through the simple, stubborn determination to be better than the people who'd tried to erase her. Okay. 10 years later, Serafina stood in the same garden where she'd first realized Lucien was betraying her. The winter roses had been replaced with spring flowers. Everything rebuilt. Everything changed. She was older now, gray in her dark hair, lines around her eyes. The brand on her shoulder had faded to a pale scar. But she was still standing, still ruling, still refusing to let the past define her future. A young girl approached, maybe 8 years old. The daughter of a merchant Serafina had helped years ago. "Your Majesty," the girl said shyly, "is it true you were exiled?" "Yes." "And you came back?" "Yes." "How?" Serafina smiled. It wasn't the sharp predator smile from her terrorist days. It was something softer, wiser. "I learned that survival isn't about avoiding pain," she said. "It's about choosing what you become when pain tries to break you. Some people let it make them cruel. I let it make me stronger." The girl thought about that. "Were you scared?" "Every day." "Still am sometimes. Fear doesn't go away. You just learn to function through it." She crouched down to the girl's level. "But here's what I want you to remember. People are going to try to destroy you sometimes. They're going to lie about you, betray you, try to erase you. And when that happens, You get to choose. Choose what? Whether you let them win, whether you become what they say you are, or you become something better. Whether you spend your life bitter about what was taken, or you build something new with what remains. The girl nodded seriously. I want to be like you. No, you don't, Serafina said gently. You want to be better than me. You want to learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself. What mistakes? I trusted the wrong people. Stayed silent when I should have fought back. Let things get so bad that violence became the only option. If I'd been braver earlier, maybe I could have stopped the corruption before it required bloodshed. But you fixed it. I survived it. There's a difference. Fixing things is what comes after survival. When you stop fighting and start building. She stood. The kingdom was healing, not healed. That would take generations. But healing. Moving towards something better than what had been destroyed. And Serafina was part of that, not as a warrior queen or a vengeful exile, just as a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself and used that experience to help others do the same. It wasn't the destiny she'd imagined. It was better, because she'd earned it. Every scar, every hard choice, every moment of becoming something darker, so she could eventually become something worth following. The girl ran off to play. Serafina watched her go. Thought about the kingdom this child would inherit. Thought about all the people who'd died to give her that chance. Thought about Lucien and Evelyn and everyone who'd tried to erase her. They'd failed. Not because Serafina was stronger or smarter or more ruthless, but because she'd refused to disappear. Had refused to let their lies become the truth. Had chosen to keep fighting even when fighting meant becoming something she'd never wanted to be. And in the end, that refusal had saved her, had saved the kingdom, had proven that the woman they tried to destroy had been exactly the queen they needed all along. Serafina turned back toward the palace, toward the throne room where a council meeting waited, toward the endless work of governance and justice and trying to make a broken system function. It wasn't glory, wasn't the fairy tale ending where everything magically fixed itself. It was just the choice to keep trying, keep building, keep being better than the people who'd tried to make her worse. And as she walked through gardens she'd helped restore, past servants who smiled instead of flinched, through halls that echoed with purpose instead of fear, Serafina understood the final truth her exile had taught her. They hadn't created her downfall. They'd created the queen who would rule forever. Not through fear or revenge or the terror that had defined her darkest days, but through the simple, stubborn, unbreakable determination to be worthy of the crown she'd almost lost. And that was a victory no exile could ever erase.